Chapter 615. Riding on a horse, dressed in a general's armor, Lansang's face was full of confidence. Below Wanxiang City, Godin was full of pride and arrogance. Beside Godin was the famous general of Jiaoji, Fan Yuhai. This person was like a ghost who always made the right choice on the battlefield, escaping the pursuit and punishment of the mercenaries time and time again. This time, Fan Yuhai followed the Siam army and brought along 5,000 elite cavalrymen. After many rounds of elimination, the remaining 5,000 were undoubtedly the best of the best. According to Yang Qindong's evaluation, they had surpassed the standard of a second-class army and were moving toward the first-class army. General Fan, how long do you think it will take for our army to conquer Wanxiang City? With an arrogant expression, Godin raised his head as he spoke, as if he would not be able to match his status if he did not do so. General Fan, the Siam army is made up of elite soldiers. It's just a small Wanxiang city. We should be able to conquer it in less than 3 days. Fan Yuhai's face was calm and even seemed a little low-key. He was not as arrogant as Godin, but even so, he had a dazzling aura and was not to be underestimated. Huh. Hearing Fan Yuhai's reply, Godin laughed out loud. All right, I'll take your blessings. Come on, charge and conquer Wanxiang City within 3 days. Then, I'll allow you to conquer the city for 1 day. Conquering the city for 1 day meant that within 1 day after conquering the city, the soldiers could take whatever they wanted. As long as they took it, it would belong to them and they would not have to hand it over. This was a special reward for the soldiers. Kill, kill, kill. When the soldiers heard the benefits promised by the general, they all roared loudly, bursting with a strong fighting spirit and morale. On the south wall of Wanxiang City, the governor of Laos, Luan Shaochun, was supporting himself on the battlements. His eyes were filled with determination as he looked at the 100,000 Siam soldiers below the city. The speed of the Siam army's appearance was far beyond Luan Shaochun's imagination. However, he was not afraid. Not to mention the strong confidence that Yang Qindong brought him, he himself had a strong confidence at the moment. All of this came from the company of Lung Feng, 2 battalions of auxiliary soldiers, and the 10,000 Laos mercenaries led by General Higuan. With a strong city and 10,000 strong soldiers by his side, Wan Shaochun had no reason to be afraid of the 100,000 Siam soldiers. Furthermore, the 6th young master would soon hear about what happened here. He only needed to defend for a while, and reinforcements would arrive. That would be the moment of victory. Everyone, get ready for battle. Lung Feng and the auxiliary troops, aim and shoot. Whoever dares to approach the catapults will die. Standing below the city gate tower, Wan Shaochun, who was only 18 years old, had a bright light flashing in his eyes. His body was full of fighting spirit. When he was in Crimson Castle, he had the experience of training auxiliary soldiers. During the Battle of Ryukyu Island, he had also participated in the battle as a political instructor. He was no longer a war newbie. At this moment, he was not afraid. Instead, he was filled with fighting spirit and vigor. After receiving the order, Lung Feng and the auxiliary soldiers on the city wall immediately looked for the best shooting position and aimed at the slowly approaching catapults. Catapults were a siege weapon that had been around for a long time. They had always been used to break through a strong city. They could throw out huge rocks in an instant. When the rocks hit the ground, they could cause great damage. It was extremely useful for suppressing the enemy's attack or destroying the enemy's defense. Of course, such a war weapon had its fatal weakness. For example, if the attack distance was too short, its strength would decrease after a mile, and it would not be able to use its advantage. Another example would be the lack of accuracy when attacking the target. Often, when a rock was thrown out, it would not be able to predict where it would fly. Most of the time, it depended on luck. Even so, catapults were still widely used. It was because the technology was too simple. Usually, the armies of small countries would use it. It was not like artillery, which required a large amount of manpower, resources, and energy. Even if Qiqian City was powerful, the current arsenal was still unable to produce artillery. The best they could do was make some grenades and landmines. All the artillery they used now came from a large warehouse. Fortunately, after obtaining the advanced books from Yang Chendong, the munition factory in Crimson City had no problems producing shells of various calibers. Their research on cannons had also made some progress. Given enough time, it was only a matter of time before the cannons were born. The Siamese army did not have any cannons. The mercenaries stationed in Wanxiang City also did not have any cannons. Yang Chendong would not be at ease leaving such powerful weapons anywhere unless he had a strong military force. Otherwise, if this matter was leaked out, it would not be helping Laos but harming it. There would be people who would think of ways to deal with it. The chances of them being targeted would only be higher. There were no cannons, but there were still 10 Type 40 rocket launchers, hundreds of artillery shells, grenades, and landmines. Wan Xiaochen had already buried the landmine 300 meters away from Wanxiang City's southern gate. He had led the entire Lung Phone Company to set them up at night. Even many officials in the provincial government did not know about this matter. At a distance of 300 meters, the sound of an explosion would not affect the soldiers guarding the city and could even kill the enemy. It couldn't be any better. However, this was just a method. The real battle depended on the performance of both sides. How to prevent the enemy's catapults from getting close to the city and not letting them do their job was the most important thing in a city defense battle. One Li was 500 meters. At such a distance, if it was a cold weapon battle, it would be impossible to do anything. As the defending side, no matter what kind of bow and arrow they used, they would not be able to hit the catapults from such a distance. They could only shrink back and let the enemy attack. Since the enemy could not hit accurately, it was all about luck. The same thing happened to the mercenaries, but it was different. They had the Type 95 and Type 81 rifles, which could easily hit the catapults up to 600 meters away. Naturally, they had the ability to control the catapults. What they needed to do now was to prevent the enemy from getting close. Wan Xiaochan gave the order. The Lung Phone Company and the auxiliary soldiers, who were in charge of the first batch of attacks, looked for the best positions. They focused their attention and waited for the enemy's catapults to get closer. In their line of sight, the catapults with large wooden wheels were slowly approaching. As long as they got close enough, they would be able to hit the catapults with boulders. Regardless of the effect, at least the momentum would be there. Then, when the soldiers charged with all their might, if they were lucky, they would be able to set up scaling ladders. Perhaps they would be able to take down the city tower in one go. If they were unlucky, it would be a battle of distance. In the end, the weaker side would be the winner. 700 meters, 650 meters, a soldier from the Lung Phone Company made a judgment with his sharp eyesight. His voice was heard by his comrades. Even if the catapults were 700 meters away, they would still be able to hit them with their rifles. However, they did not do so in order to pursue accuracy. They did not want to amaze the world with a single brilliant feat 620 meters. 600 meters, fire. When the Siamese soldiers finally reached the optimal firing range, gunshots rang out. Because it was daytime, they couldn't see the gunfire clearly, but the sound of gunfire did not stop. Then, the Siamese soldiers around the catapults fell to the ground one by one as if they had been bewitched. Is this the power of the new repeating rifles? Not bad. Riding on his horse, General Gordon squinted his eyes with an arrogant expression. Then, his surprise turned into excitement. Before they came, the military had obtained some information about the mercenaries. Naturally, they could not hide something like the rifles from them. After meeting Fan Yuhai, he had a better understanding of the situation. The first time he met Fan Yuhai, he was indeed shocked. At the same time, his greed was completely ignited. In Gordon's eyes, he had brought 100,000 soldiers with him and could mobilize another 100,000 soldiers behind him. However, dealing with Wanxiang City, which only had 10,000 soldiers, was as easy as using a cannon to kill a mosquito. In fact, he even thought that the moment he arrived with his army, the domineering aura would cause the mercenaries to immediately open the city and surrender. Things didn't go as he expected, but Gugu wasn't too disappointed. Are you not convinced? Want to fight? Then I'll beat you until you're convinced. I'll beat you until you can't fight anymore. From the perspective of a victor, the enemy's belongings would eventually belong to him. Didn't that mean that after he won, these repeating rifles would also become his spoils of war? He thought that once he had all these and the number of troops, he would become an invincible army. At that time, Siam would inevitably become the core of this region and enjoy a glorious situation like the Great Ming Dynasty, where thousands of countries came to pay homage to it. As the general who had made the greatest contribution to the war, wouldn't he also have great power and authority and be respected by everyone? Gordon, who was still in a state of fantasy, was quickly interrupted by Fan Yuhai. "General Gordon, did you see that? The repeating rifles of the mercenaries are very powerful and accurate. It's time to send in the Iron Shield soldiers." Fan Yuhai continued to tell the secret of the Iron Shield's ability to block bullets to the Siam Kingdom, just like how he told the destroyed Lansang Kingdom. Back then, he organized a battle to attack and defend Hanoi City. Now, he was going to do the same to attack and defend Wanxiang City. The difference was that Luan Xiaochun, who was also a provincial governor, was very careful. He guarded every city gate and made it impossible for them to launch a sneak attack. They had no choice but to attack the city openly. Chapter 6:16. However, it did not matter. This time, Siam had mobilized 150,000 soldiers, which was far more than the Lansang Kingdom had mobilized previously. As for the 5,000 cavalrymen that he brought with him, they were there as bystanders. If everything went well, he would not mind getting a share of the loot. If not, he would run as fast as he could. In short, he would not let the mercenaries catch him. Not bad. Men, order the Iron Shield soldiers to lead the charge. Although Gordon was unhappy that Fan Yuhai had disrupted his fantasy, this was a war. Every soldier that died was another loss. Hence, he decided to listen to Fan Yuhai and send out the Iron Shield soldiers. Iron shields that were more than 8 centimeters thick could block bullets from muskets. Iron shields that were more than 10 centimeters thick could also block bullets from muskets in close combat. This had been proven countless times. Before the war, Siam had mobilized a lot of resources and gathered a lot of blacksmiths in the country to forge 5,000 iron shields. The shields were held by 5,000 strong men to defend against the enemy's muskets. Under Gordon's command, the 5,000 iron shield soldiers appeared. Once the 5-meter-tall iron shield was set up, it could cover their entire body and protect them from the threat of firearms. It's the Iron Shield soldiers. On the city wall, the Lung Feng soldiers cried out in shock. However, that was all they could do. They were not worried. They did not forget that Governor Xiao Wan had led them to bury many mines. Those were the best weapons against the Iron Shield soldiers. The Iron Shield soldiers can only protect a portion of the people. Look for opportunities to attack those who are not protected. Wan Xiaochun's expression did not change as he spoke calmly. What happened this time was a test for him. If he could fend off Siam's attack, he would not only be an outstanding local governor, but also a capable general. His knowledge of both civil and military affairs would allow him to walk a better and broader path in the future. The general did not panic, and the soldiers were confident. Lung Feng and the auxiliary soldiers began to look for opportunities to fire continuously. Although this could not stop the enemy from approaching, it was still able to eliminate the enemy's strength to a certain extent. At the same time, it was also a considerable deterrent. Once the shield was out, the gunshots continued. Compared to before, it was much more sporadic. Gordon, who was on his horse, laughed. He could bear such a loss. As long as the main force of the army could approach the city walls, with the help of the trebuchets, their morale would definitely soar. Perhaps if they were lucky, they would be able to seize control of the city walls after a few attempts and obtain the final victory. After the Siamese soldiers threw down hundreds of corpses, the catapults were finally positioned at a distance of 500 meters. Then, boulders were lifted out of the catapults. With the help of levers, the boulders flew into the air and smashed towards Wanxiang City. From afar, the momentum was astonishing, but the weakness was also very obvious. Out of 10 boulders thrown out, it was already very good if one of them hit the city tower. Most of them hit the city wall, causing the ground to shake, but it did not affect the overall situation. But it had to be said that the trebuchet's momentum was still very impressive. Under its encouragement, more and more Siamese soldiers followed behind the shield-wielding soldiers and began to move forward step by step. Sher could even see the appearance of scaling ladders through the cracks. This was a great tool for climbing the city walls. Hit them hard. Above the southern city wall, Wan Xiaochun could clearly see the enemy slowly approaching because of the high ground. The shield could only protect the front of the soldiers and not the top of their heads. Therefore, the enemy's head was clearly displayed in front of the defenders. They did not even need to aim. All they needed to do was fire a shot at the top of the enemy's head, and one of them would die. This made Cold Vanguard's auxiliary soldiers feel very good. However, they were more excited to see what would happen when the enemy entered the 300-meter-long defensive line. 50 meters left, 30 meters left, 10 meters. Lung Feng was still using his vision to estimate the enemy's position. Boom, 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 boom. Finally, when the first row of shield bearers crossed the 300-meter battle line, the mines were triggered and a loud explosion rang out. The powerful force blasted the shield bearers away, and the huge force sent countless people into the air. The aftermath of the explosion was like a huge wave on the sea, overturning the mountains and overturning the seas, throwing one enemy after another to the ground. At this moment, the Siamese army suffered heavy losses. Not only were more than half of the 5,000 shield-wielding soldiers killed, but most of their shields were also blown into pieces. The Siamese soldiers behind the shield-wielding soldiers were caught off guard and suffered heavy casualties. Hit them. Don't be afraid of wasting bullets. We still have a lot of ammunition in the palace. Hit them hard. Wan Xiaochun also took a 95-style pistol and opened up a burst of fire towards the city walls. Lung Feng and the auxiliary soldiers, who were originally in charge of the replacements, were also mobilized. The 900 soldiers were firing at full capacity. At this moment, they were fighting to their heart's content and killing to their heart's content. Under the dual threat of landmines and muskets, the Siamese soldiers, who had lost thousands of soldiers, lost their morale and began to retreat. They trampled over each other as they retreated. Many soldiers died at the feet of their comrades. In such an environment, those who were pushed to the ground would never get up again. How did this happen? How did this happen? What the hell was that thing that exploded? What was that? Seeing his soldiers falling to the ground in droves and turning into corpses, seeing the metal shields being thrown all over the place, some of them even deformed, and seeing the majestic army retreating like frightened rabbits, Gordon was enraged. He turned and stared at Fan Yuhai. His eyes were red and burning with rage. Fan Yuhai was also shocked by the scene before him. He had not seen the mercenaries use such weapons in the previous battles, so he was not prepared. He had forgotten that most of the previous battles were sieges. The use of landmines was naturally limited. In the only battle of Hanoi City, he did not want to destroy the commercial street. Moreover, the Jiaoji army was charging ferociously and did not have time to plant landmines. Hence, he did not use them. However, it did not mean that they could not be used. Now, they finally came in handy. They caught the Siamese army off guard and dealt a heavy blow. The effect was shocking. These are landmines. Actually, the Ming dynasty has used them before, but they were not this powerful. Fan Yuhai was indeed a famous general in Jiaoji. He quickly thought of the deceased generals Wan Gungwang and Chen Heijin. Both of them had encountered such things in the rainforest. They even said that the mercenaries called them landmines. They were powerful weapons that would explode upon contact. Didn't this match what was happening before him? Landmines? Since you knew, why didn't you say so earlier? Gordon continued to blame him. Obviously, he did not want to bear the consequences of losing the first battle. He wanted to push all the blame to someone else. Fan Yuhai did not answer. Instead, he looked to the front and said calmly, "General Gordon, let's retreat first. There is no one controlling the catapults. The morale is low. Let's regroup and prepare for battle." Following Fan Yuhai's gaze, Gordon noticed that his trebuchets had stopped working and the soldiers in front of the trebuchets were all lying on the ground. It was obvious that this was the result of the continuous firing of the flintlocks. They had lost the first battle just like that. Although Gordon didn't want to admit it, he knew that this wasn't the time for loyalty. He could only grit his teeth and say helplessly, "Beat the gong to retreat." Retreat 5 miles. The Siamese army retreated. They did not even want the bodies of the soldiers, catapults, and shields. The resources were all within the firing range of the mercenaries' muskets. Who would snatch them back? Unless they launched an all-out attack. However, if the problem of landmines was not solved, could they really do it? Victory! The enemy ran away with their tails between their legs. On the south wall of Wanxiang City, when the Siamese army retreated, cheers erupted like a tsunami. It was like a farewell song, mocking the incompetence of the Siamese army. Don't move. Soldiers, go down and clean up the battlefield. Bring back those that can be brought back and burn those that can't. Wan Xiaoqian's face was flushed with excitement. However, as the commander, he suppressed his excitement and spoke calmly. They could only send the soldiers down because the landmines were not completely destroyed. If they sent someone else, the landmines might explode and cause unpredictable consequences. After that, the soldiers of Cold Vanguard carried barrels of kerosene out of the city. There were too many enemy corpses, and the best way to collect them was to burn them all. Otherwise, with so many corpses, it was inevitable that germs would appear and cause a plague. The Siamese army, which had already retreated, could only watch helplessly as the mercenaries carried out their operations below the city walls. They had tried to wreak havoc earlier, but they were quickly met with a barrage of gunfire from the top of the city walls. They had no choice but to retreat after throwing down hundreds of fresh corpses. This made General Gordon even angrier. He stomped his feet and cursed in the barracks at the back. However, there was nothing he could do. "General Gordon, please don't be angry. The most important thing now is to find a way to destroy their landmines. Otherwise, we will be in a passive position." Fan Yuhai was not a subordinate of Gordon, and he had his own 5,000 cavalrymen. Although he did not have a large number of soldiers, he was powerful. When he faced Gordon, he naturally said whatever he wanted to say. He felt detached from the situation. Solve? How? It would have been better if he did not mention it. When he mentioned it, Gordon was furious. Before the battle started, Fan Yuhai said that conquering Wanxiang City would be a piece of cake. Why didn't he say that there were landmines? He caused Gordon to lose thousands of men and horses in the first battle. He even lost 2/3 of his iron shields that could block muskets. Now, he had less than 2,000 iron shields. His preparations were destroyed in an instant. He was in a passive position now. Chapter 617. We have to come up with a solution. Fortunately, we are the ones attacking, and the enemy won't dare to attack us. We still have the initiative. We have time to think of a solution. Fan Yuhai frowned. Gordon claimed to be a famous general in Siam, but his temper was a little too bad. On the battlefield, victory and defeat were common. If they lost this time, they would find the reason and win the next time. What was the use of getting angry? All right, let's think of a solution quickly. I can't wait to attack Wanxiang City. Not only will I kill the mercenaries guarding the city, but I won't let the civilians off either. I want them to die. I want them to be terrified. In the future, if anyone mentions my name, they will have to keep quiet and avoid me. Gordon, who was still in a state of rage, had a furious look on his face as if he was really infuriated. Wait, on the other hand, Fan Yuhai wasn't affected by Gordon's emotions. Instead, he was moved after hearing Gordon's words. After about 3 breaths, he suddenly clapped his hands and laughed. Yes, that's it. Ha! I've already thought of a way to break the enemy's landmines. Seeing that Fan Yuhai had come up with a solution so quickly, Gordon looked at Fan Yuhai in confusion, as if saying, "Can you do it or not? Don't try to fool me with a random solution and make me lose more soldiers." General Gordon, didn't you mention the civilians just now? Let's let the civilians walk in front. Do you remember what I told you a while ago? Look for the civilians in Siam. As long as we gather them and push them to the front line, they will step on the landmines. Won't we be able to break the enemy's formation easily? Fan Yuhai laughed. Godin was the best at making use of the civilians. He used this method when he was fighting with the mercenaries previously. However, he was confused by the mercenaries' retreat. Then, his plan was broken during the counterattack at night. He had no choice but to give up on this idea. This time, with so many landmines in front of him, he couldn't help but think of this matter again. Moreover, he could guarantee that this method would be effective this time. Godin was also a demon who killed without batting an eyelid. Not to mention the Hans, he would not hesitate to sacrifice his own citizens or even his own soldiers. Hence, he would definitely not reject such a method to make use of the Hans. Good. General Fan is indeed smart. Since that's the case, this general will immediately give the order to gather all the Han citizens in the nearby cities and send them to the front lines. When Godin heard Fan Yuhai's words, he had really arranged for his men to count the number of Han citizens in his territory. However, it was just a count. The arrogant him did not think that he would need to use any methods to deal with the 10,000-plus mercenaries. However, it was different now. The appearance of landmines gave him a huge headache. Since the Han people were useful, he would capture all the people who did the statistics. However, this would take a few days. Godin thought that he had grasped the method to deal with the mercenaries. However, what he did not know was that as his troops approached Wanxiang City, he initiated a provocation. This was equivalent to giving the mercenaries an excuse to deal a heavy blow to Siam. Some people would ask, Yang Qindong is leading the 2nd and 3rd regiments of the 1st Division of the Cold Front Division into the territory of the Phnom Penh dynasty. Most of the Navy's Cold Front Division can only be on duty at sea. Now that Wanxiang City is under siege by the enemy, where are the soldiers coming from? Don't forget, before the war started, when a matter with the Solingen family was still brewing, Yang Qindong had disappeared for a period of time. It was during that period of time that he had already set up a trap for Siam. At that time, he thought that once the mercenaries and the Phnom Penh dynasty started a war, this country would definitely be restless. Since Yang Qindong was personally involved, how could the battle array be too small? Otherwise, it would not match his status. In fact, the commander that he left behind in Siam was one of the 2 heads of Yang Xie's military, the commander of the 1st Division of the Cold Front Division, Lung Song. Wollonga was also known as Wulong Thani City. It was one of the biggest cities in the north of Siam. At the same time, it was also the rear of Gordon's 100,000 soldiers. It was used to provide military supplies and for emergency use. However, there were only 50,000 soldiers here. 500 of them were sent to capture the Han civilians. At this moment, such a large city was secretly surrounded by the mercenaries led by Commander Lung Song. 20 days ago, Lung Song was ordered by Yang Qindong to secretly enter the country with the 1st Regiment of the 1st Division and 8 auxiliary battalions. They hid in the dense forest. They even saw with their own eyes that Gordon led 100,000 soldiers out of Wollonga City and headed straight for Wanxiang City. At that time, they could have set up an ambush. However, Lung Song did not do so. After that, they saw the 50,000 soldiers out of the city. However, they still did not make a move. In Yang Qindong's words, now is not the time to start a full-scale war with Siam. If they took the initiative to attack, it would be unjustifiable. Their military strength was limited. This was the shortcoming of the mercenaries. In a war where they could not win, such a war was not worth the effort. After seeing another 50,000 soldiers pass by, Lung Song immediately carried out the military operation plan formulated by the 6th Young Master. He started a plan for Wollonga City. The plan was divided into 3 parts. First, secretly enter Wollonga City and attack them from the inside. Second, severely injure the 50,000 soldiers of Siam and burn their military supplies and provisions. They would have no choice but to return. Third, when Gordon returned, the mercenaries would give up on Wollonga City and ambush them. They would try their best to eliminate their forces so that they would not have the energy to invade Wanxiang City. As long as these 3 points were achieved, Yang Shandong would have enough time to settle the matter of the Phnom Penh dynasty and reach the final conclusion of the peace talks. Yes, this time Yang Shandong did not intend to swallow the Phnom Penh dynasty. He did not have such a big appetite. He had not even occupied Vietnam and Laos for a long time. The internal affairs had not been settled yet. How could he take over the Phnom Penh dynasty? If he really did that, there would not be enough manpower to protect and manage the place. It would only benefit other countries. Yang Shandong would not do such a loss-making deal. Lung Song quietly left Chichen City. Although he was the commander of a division and the only division commander in the army, he would be credited for any results that the Lung vanguard achieved on the front line. However, how could the fruits of victory be better than the fruits of victory obtained by himself? This time, Yang Shun finally transferred him out and gave him great expectations. Lung Song held his breath in his heart. Not only did he have to complete the task, but he also had to complete the task at the smallest cost. He had to show the heads of his subordinates that he didn't rely on his seniority, but he had the real ability. He had great ambitions and was especially attentive in executing the 6th young master's military plan. He first sent people to disguise themselves as the Phnom Penh dynasty's caravan and entered Wulong City. In order not to attract attention, the Lung vanguard entered the city in groups of 3 to 5 people and kept a low profile. They entered different inns in the city like a drop of water thrown into a river. No one would have thought that the enemy would suddenly appear behind them. In addition, there was only 1 battalion of the Lung vanguard that entered the city. The 400 people were divided into many groups and entered the city separately. For a city with a population of 100,000 people and 50,000 soldiers, this number of people was really nothing. They did not reveal themselves. A battalion of the Lung vanguard entered the city, indicating that the first step of the plan was successful. After the news of Gordon attacking Wanxiang City came, they had an excuse to start the war. Now, they would fight in self-defense. Lung Song arranged for his scouts to enter the city and contact the Lung vanguard warriors. They decided to attack Wulong City tonight. The battalion commander of the 1st Regiment's 3rd Battalion, Xiao Yining, entered the city. This person had displayed astonishing leadership skills in the process of reclaiming and pacifying Ryukyu Island. In addition, he was qualified. Thus, he naturally became the 3rd Battalion commander of the 1st Regiment. Many people were envious that he could enter the 1st Regiment and become a battalion commander of the Lung Vanguard Battalion. But to him, this was nothing. His goal in life was not limited to being a battalion commander. In his opinion, he should at least be a division commander. Only then would it be awe-inspiring and be considered a true glory. There was no need to doubt the ability of a person with such ambitions. After secretly meeting with the scouts in the city and receiving the new military order, Xiao Yining began to run around, quickly contacting all his subordinates. They agreed that they would act in the middle of the night to take down Wulongnan City Gate and lead the main army into the city. Compared to the flames of war on the front lines, there were soldiers and horses. Wulong City, which was at the rear, could be said to be peaceful and prosperous. They were also fighting with mercenaries. As the main attacker, there was naturally no pressure. Furthermore, Siam's military strength had always been at the top of the nearby countries. This made them think that they were saints and everyone else was mortals. With such an arrogant mentality and the stimulation of the 50,000 Siam soldiers entering the city, the entire Wulong City fell into a false state of prosperity. With a large population, it was naturally easy to do all kinds of business. For example, the restaurants, casinos, and especially the brothels in the city were filled with people and were extremely lively. Even if the front lines reported that the attack was not going well, it did not seem to affect them much. They could do whatever they wanted and enjoy themselves as much as they wanted. Of course, they did not do nothing. For example, after receiving General Gordon's orders, they sent out 50,000 soldiers to capture the Han people in other cities and towns. Chapter 618. Just like how Yang Qindong would think that those who were not of the same race were not of the same race. The people of Siam also had the same thought. No matter how many years these Han people had lived in their country, as long as they were Han people or their descendants, they were not to be trusted. Their status was also the lowest. Now that they had to capture these people, the soldiers sent out to carry out this mission did not feel any burden at all. It was as if it was only right to treat the Han people however they wanted. The soldiers swaggered through the streets and left. Naturally, their mission was leaked. When Xiao Yining heard that the enemy troops were going to capture Han people, he sensed that something was wrong. This made him even more determined to take action tonight. When the news reached the ears of the other Lung Feng soldiers, they were enraged. They could not wait to destroy Wulong City and disrupt the enemy's plan. Amidst the torment, night finally arrived. The sky was getting darker and darker. When the watches of the soldiers of the 3rd Battalion of the Cold Front Battalion showed 11 o'clock at night, they began to walk out of the inns. Then, like ghosts in the night, they split into dozens of groups and slowly and carefully moved toward the southern gate of Wulong City. The Siamese soldiers were too careless. They did not expect the enemy to infiltrate their rear. The soldiers guarding the gate were completely unprepared. Originally, there were 1,000 soldiers guarding the gate. However, there were less than 300 soldiers left. The other 700 soldiers had applied for leave to play in the city. Arrogance and arrogance were bad habits that should not exist in an army. If an army had these habits, it could only be said that they were not far from being destroyed. When Xiao Yining led the 400 Lung Feng soldiers to the south gate, he saw the enemy's morale was low. Wait a minute, something is not right. Seeing that there were only about 300 enemies in front of him, Xiao Yining instinctively stopped moving forward. He led the soldiers to hide in the shadows. Go, find the brothers who stayed here. Without Xiao Yining's order, the Lung Feng soldiers who stayed here to observe the situation found him first. They then explained the situation to him. Battalion commander, the enemy did not notice us. There should be 1,000 soldiers here, but most of them applied for leave to play in the city. Even the Chiliarch left. Is that so? Xiao Yining was shocked when he heard this. He didn't dare to think that something like this could happen. If something similar happened in Lungfeng, everyone from the highest officer to the lowest squad leader would be punished. They would be given demerits, and it was even possible that they would be expelled from the military. Needless to say, the Siamese soldiers were truly blessed. Of course, some happiness came at a heavy price, such as one's life. Good. It's good that the enemy is not prepared. This is our chance. The Xiao family wanted to laugh out loud. They looked at the watch on their wrist. It was 11:45. There was still a quarter of an hour left. With Lung Feng's ability, he had more than enough time to prepare. Inform everyone to begin the operation. No one is to make a sound, and no one is to fire. Turn off the safety. I will punish whoever drops the ball later. The Xiao family's expression was stern as they issued the military order in a cold voice. Lung Feng and his brothers, who had been impatient for a long time, quickly formed groups of 3 and crept towards the 300 enemies that were still illuminated by the torches. Even though there were only 300 people left, they were obviously distracted. They were either leaning against the wall, half squatting on the ground, or leaning against each other. They were all resting with their eyes closed. Perhaps, in their subconscious, they didn't even think about the danger they would face if they stayed here. Without the slightest bit of alertness, Lung Feng's mission was very easy. They only needed to keep an eye on the target, walk behind or beside the target, and then cover the target's mouth with their large hands. Their left hand, which held a military knife, gently cut forward. Bright red blood spurted out, and a life was lost. The eyes closed forever, and there was no longer any breath. Perhaps some of the Siamese soldiers struggled before they died, but under Lung Feng's large hands, their struggles and resistance were futile. They only sped up their blood flow, but it didn't change the situation at all. Outside the torches, the Siamese soldiers were silently slaughtered one after another. In just 5 minutes, more than 100 enemies outside the perimeter were all killed. There was no sound or movement from the beginning to the end. This was the strength of the Lung Feng, and it was the result of their training. It was another kind of report. After the enemies outside the perimeter were all killed, The next target was the 100 enemies under the torches at the city gate. It was unrealistic to try and assassinate them one by one, but Xiao Yining wasn't afraid. He waved his hand, and a portion of the 1st Company and 2nd Company of the 3rd Battalion quickly approached the city gate with him. They moved cautiously, and even though it was only a distance of 100 meters, it actually took them more than 5 minutes to walk. During this time, the 100 people didn't make any noise other than the sound of their breathing. Finally, they approached the south gate. Xiao Yining was the first to pounce forward like a tiger. Within a breath, more than 100 Lung Feng did the same. Puff, puff, puff. The military knives silently pierced the chests of the Siamese soldiers. The intense pain immediately woke them up. Some of them even wanted to scream before they died, but when a large hand appeared in front of their eyes and reached their mouths, everything was over. A total of 300 enemies, except for one Siamese soldier who was stabbed in the wrong spot and died after a scream. The other 299 people didn't have a chance to make a sound. Xiao Yining stared at the Lung Feng, who made a mistake. Fortunately, there were no more enemies at the south gate. Otherwise, it would have been a disaster. Open the gate, send the signal, and lead the army into the city. Xiao Yining immediately stopped and ordered. There were only 2 minutes left until midnight. Outside the south gate, Lung Song led the 1st and 2nd Battalions and 8 auxiliary battalions of the 1st Battalion to wait. Everyone's eyes were resolute as they stared straight ahead. They didn't even blink for a long time. Commander, there are only 2 minutes left. Will Battalion Commander Xiao and his men encounter any problems? Political Commissar Mo Chengyu asked worriedly. Commander, why don't I lead my men up the tower? I don't mean to brag, but this tower is only a dozen meters tall. My men and I will only need a minute to climb it. 2nd Battalion Commander Ling Daqiang sounded more anxious as he spoke in a hoarse voice. Don't we still have 2 minutes? Let's wait a little longer. We have to have faith in Battalion Commander Xiao, Lung Song said calmly. How could he not know the capabilities of his own battalion commander and Lung Feng? Even if there was an accident, he should have heard gunshots. However, there was no movement, so why was he so anxious? As soon as Lung Song finished speaking, the south gate, 400 meters away, slowly opened from the inside. A bright torch appeared and flickered 3 times to the left and 3 times to the right. Haha, we did it! Battalion Commander Ling Daqiang couldn't help but laugh excitedly. He could finally enter the city and start a massacre. During this period of time, the 1st Regiment had been carrying out missions in Crimson City, dealing with the captives and other matters that were sent to the island. He was already tired of it and couldn't wait to show off his skills on the battlefield. Now, the opportunity had finally presented itself. That's our secret signal. Advance. Lung Song carefully looked through the night vision binoculars. After confirming that it was Xiao Yining's secret signal, he gave the order. Then, the 4,000 mercenaries stood up from the ground and crazily rushed forward. In front of the south gate, the city gate had been completely opened, allowing the mercenaries to rush in. Lung Song appeared in front of Xiao Yining along with the army. Battalion Commander Xiao, you've worked hard. How's the situation? Commander, the south gate has been controlled. The enemies in the city have no other defenses. Xiao Yining gave a standard military salute and replied. Very good. Lung Song nodded approvingly. This result was better than he expected. Originally, he thought that with 400 mercenaries against 1,000, they would have to make some noise. That way, the city gate could be opened, but the enemy would be alerted and counterattack. But now, the city gate was occupied, and the enemy was kept in the dark. This way, they had more time to set up their plans. Since the enemy hasn't noticed, we can't follow the first plan. Let's go with the second plan. Lung Song said in high spirits. The second plan was to enter the city without alerting the enemy. Then, with the Cold Vanguard Company and the Auxiliary Battalion as one unit, they would march separately. This way, his troops would be divided into 21 units. If they appeared in various parts of the city and fought at night, it would give the enemy the impression that they were everywhere. With more than 4,000 men, they would be able to unleash 10 times the power. It would be more effective in conquering and destroying Wulong City. Fortunately, Lung Song had prepared the second plan, although at that time, he didn't think it would work. However, due to the carelessness of the Siamese soldiers and the perfect performance of Xiao Yining's 3 battalions, the second plan could be implemented. Suppressing his excitement, Lung Song gathered the 13 company commanders of Lung Feng and the 8 battalion commanders of Lung Feng. Follow Plan 2. Get to the designated location as fast as you can. Remember, try not to make any noise before you get there. Even if you accidentally encounter an enemy, it's best if you can deal with them without making a sound. When it's 1 o'clock, everyone will attack with all their might. Understood? Chapter 619. Lung Song held a map of Wulong City that he had prepared a long time ago and spoke to his subordinates. Familiarize yourself with your destination. If you don't understand, come and ask me. Now, I will give you 5 minutes to prepare and assemble your troops before we depart. Before they came, the officers had already imprinted the first and second plans in their minds. How could anyone not be familiar with them now? Therefore, after nodding their heads, they went to gather their troops and instructed them to not make any noise as much as possible and to arrive at the designated location as quietly as possible. If they wanted to kill the enemy, they would start from one point and kill as much as they wanted. 5 minutes later, the unit furthest away from their destination set off. Then the second unit, the third unit. Soon, Lung Song and political commissar Mo Chengyu also disappeared from the south gate. In less than 10 minutes, everything returned to normal. Only the night breeze could be heard. At this time, Wulong City was shrouded in darkness and silence. It was already past 12 o'clock. Those who wanted to sleep had already gone to sleep. Those who wanted to play had already found a place to bury their souls. Everything seemed to be the same as usual, until the sound of swords clashing could be heard on the street, breaking the silence of the street. There were the 100 soldiers guarding the south gate. Because they had lost all their money in gambling, they had no choice but to leave early. Unfortunately, they bumped into a group of mercenaries who were rushing towards their destination on the street. The two sides suddenly met on the street. On one side, there were 100 gamblers who had lost all their money. On the other side, there were 400 auxiliary soldiers. After the two sides looked at each other, a short battle began. The 100 Siamese soldiers who did not bring any weapons were the ones being slaughtered. However, they still screamed before they died. Enemy attack! Enemy attack! In the silence of the night, the screams spread far and wide. It also attracted the attention of the nearby residents. The commotion was getting louder and louder. Battalion commander, what should we do? A company commander stabbed the last Siamese soldier to death on the ground with a bayonet. He turned around and asked the battalion commander, "Don't think too much about it. Go to the rendezvous point as fast as you can." The auxiliary battalion commander secretly cursed his bad luck, but he didn't panic. This was just a warm-up before the big battle. The team of 400 people quickly left. When the people nearby came out to take a look, they saw the ground full of corpses and the smell of blood. Someone screamed first. Then, similar screams came one after another. The commotion spread far and wide. Finally, the people on the other side of the street were alerted. Then, the Siamese soldiers in the city also received the news. The hour hand was approaching 12:50. There were still 10 minutes before the general attack. Except for a few small teams that were further away from the destination, most of the soldiers had already arrived at the designated location. However, the streets were already bustling with activity. The death of more than 100 Siamese soldiers was definitely a big case, and it attracted the attention of many people. Many Siamese captains, chiliarchs, and centurions who received the news were rushing over with their men. Even at this moment, they still didn't think that they were in danger. They just thought that some fugitive and his subordinates had bumped into each other and got into a fight. The hour hand kept moving. Finally, it pointed to the final destination, 1 o'clock in the morning. Send the signal. Attack! Commander Lung Song's voice trembled. He was excited. As soon as he finished speaking, a bright red signal flare rose into the sky and lit up the sky. following which gunshots and grenades rang out all over the city. The all-out attack had begun. At this moment, Wulong City had turned into a city of fire. Flames shot out in all directions, incessant and endless. The power of the Type 95 and the Type 81 assault rifle formed an impenetrable fire net. All the Siamese soldiers in front of them became live targets. Whenever the soldiers gathered together to form a dense charge, a series of grenades would end their lives. Their bodies were thrown high into the air before they fell heavily to the ground. Any Siamese who walked on the streets, whether they were generals or soldiers, armed or ordinary civilians, became targets for the mercenaries. They were like food in the eyes of a beast. They were constantly bitten and devoured. They died or injured. There were gunshots everywhere, and enemies were everywhere. It gave people a feeling that there was nowhere to hide and nowhere to hide. It seemed that at this moment, no place was safe. No place was heaven. Charge! Charge out! Report this to General Gordon. We must charge out. The 5 captains of the Siamese army in the city shouted at the top of their lungs. It seemed that if they didn't do this, they would lose all hope. Retreat. Retreat to the south gate. After an hour of continuous gunshots, the Siamese soldiers gradually came to their senses. After a few consecutive charges and countless deaths, they finally understood how terrifying their opponents were. At this moment, no one was thinking about fighting with the enemy who had entered the city. They only had one thought in their minds, and that was to retreat. They had to escape and leave this hell on earth. Gunshots were heard intermittently throughout the night. When the sky finally brightened, the streets were littered with corpses. From time to time, among the crowds, there were survivors who were injured and wailing. Many places in the city were on fire. The places where food and weapons were stored were severely damaged. Even when the sky brightened, the fire showed no signs of stopping. It was still burning fiercely. The mercenaries had retreated, leaving behind a city full of corpses and injured soldiers. According to the statistics, more than 60,000 soldiers and civilians of Siam were killed or injured in this battle. At least half of them were burned by the fire and trampled to death. In fact, only about 10,000 people died in the hands of the mercenaries. The warehouse was burned. Apart from the corpses and the injured soldiers who could not be moved, there was no one left in the city. The scariest thing about this battle was that they didn't know who did it, and they didn't know how many enemies there were. They only knew from the survivors' descriptions that there should be a lot of enemies, and they seemed to be everywhere. Moreover, they all had very powerful rifles in their hands, and they even suspected that the other side had cannons. Otherwise, why would there be the sound of explosions from time to time? It was unknown whether outsiders believed in such a statement, but the people living in Wulong City firmly believed in it, because on this night, at least half of the 100,000 people were affected. Their families and friends were either killed or injured. Out of the 50,000 Siamese soldiers, more than 10,000 were killed and 10,000 were injured. The remaining 30,000 soldiers were lucky enough to escape. They did not dare to stay in the vicinity. Instead, they went straight to Kongjing City, which was south of Wulong City. From afar, the 30,000 soldiers looked like a group of homeless people. They wore tattered uniforms, their eyes were lifeless, and their morale was low. Most of them did not even know where their weapons were when they escaped. At this moment, who would dare to believe that this was an army with level 3 combat power? Were they supposed to be the elite soldiers of Siam? In a dense forest about 10 miles south of Wulong City, Lung Song was leading his army to reorganize themselves. After a night of battle, they had achieved their goal. Especially after burning the enemy's military supplies and provisions, General Gordon had no choice but to retreat. How is the count of the casualties? Although Lung Song also felt a little tired, as a commander, he naturally couldn't just fall asleep like ordinary soldiers. There was still too much work for him to do. He needed to preside over and make decisions. Commander, Lung Fong has returned. There are only 2 injured soldiers. However, it is not a big problem. They just need to rest for a while to recover their combat power. 7 auxiliary soldiers died and 200 were injured. 3 of them were seriously injured. The rest only had light injuries. The political commissar of the 1st Regiment, Immo Chung-yu, looked at the statistics of the battalions and reported to Lung Song. Good. Arrange for a platoon of auxiliary soldiers to send the 3 seriously injured soldiers away. The rest of you should take the time to rest. In the afternoon, dig out the ammunition buried in the forest. Replenish them and be ready for battle. Hearing that Lung Feng did not suffer any losses and only lost a few auxiliary soldiers, Lung Song felt some heartache. However, overall, he was satisfied with the results. Lung Feng was indeed Lung Feng. Not only was he good at killing the enemy, he was also good at protecting himself on the battlefield, especially when it came to city warfare in the middle of the night. Who knows how many times they had practiced it? Their hard work had finally paid off. As the commander, Lung Song was also proud of it. Immediately report to the 6th young master about our results. Also, tell him that we are not going to go deeper into Siam. We are going to stay here and ambush Gudan. Last night's battle at Wulong City went too smoothly. Lung Song's side did not suffer any losses, and they were able to safely retreat from the city. This gave Lung Song a lot of confidence in the upcoming battle plan. Since he was leading the 1st Regiment of Lung Feng and 8 auxiliary battalions, they should be the main force. Wherever they go, they should be able to kill the enemy until they can't find their way north. As the saying goes, it is better to break one finger than to injure all 10. Lung Song decided to show Gudan his power. It would be best if he could kill this person. If he could not kill him, he would at least severely injure him. This way, when Gudan thought about hiring mercenaries in the future, he would tremble without a fight. After the telegram was sent out, Yang Chendong, who was in Phnom Penh Dynasty, received the report. He immediately gave orders and agreed to Lung Song's request for battle. However, he also gave his own suggestion. If they could fight, then they should fight. If they cannot fight, then they should not force themselves. It was more important to preserve their own strength. Chapter 620. Below Wanxiang City, there was a short period of peace after the battle. The power of the landmines had frightened General Gordon. He was not prepared to launch any more attacks before the Han civilians from the rear were sent up. Since he was the one attacking the city, he had the initiative. Furthermore, Wulong City had already prepared food for the army. There would not be any problems defending the city for a few months. Since there was no need to go to war for the time being, General Gordon summoned the singers who followed the army and held a party in his tent. He also called his generals and General Fan Yuhai to enjoy the joy of the interlude between wars. 8 young women with great figures were dressed in faintly discernible gauze. Their waists were swaying in the tent. Gordon and the other generals sat around them and laughed from time to time. Their gazes followed the movements of the women as they enjoyed the feast that was brought to their eyes. Gordon, who was sitting at the front, had already set his goal of warming the bed tonight. He wanted to fight for 300 rounds to get rid of the bad luck on his body. Just as he was indulging in his fantasies, a bodyguard quietly entered the tent with an ugly expression. He walked to his ear and whispered in a low voice, "What?" Suddenly, Godin's face turned red, and the wine cup in his hand flew out with a bang. This movement attracted the attention of the other generals, and the 8 women screamed in shock. "Scream! Scream! What are you screaming for? Get out of here!" Gordon waved his hand. At this moment, his eyes were filled with a strong, murderous aura. It was as if he would kill anyone who dared to appear in front of him and offend him. The 8 singers hurriedly left the tent, leaving behind only a few generals in the tent. Fan Yuhai raised his eyebrows and then frowned deeply. He had a feeling that something bad was about to happen. "General, what happened?" A captain who was Gordon's absolute confidant asked in confusion. "Something happened. Wulong City was invaded last night. Our 50,000-strong army was defeated and was forced to retreat to the south. Our rations and weapons in the city were all burned. Damn it." First, he used a calm voice to report what he had just heard. Then, killing intent burst out from his eyes. It was as though he wanted to materialize a saber light to kill someone. There was silence in the tent, as everyone digested Godun's words. However, very soon, a general said in disbelief, "That's impossible. We are right here. The four gates of Wanxiang City are tightly shut. It's impossible for them to send an army to surround us." "That's right. The Lao's army won't go around us. The armies of other countries are all our allies. They won't attack us secretly. Could it be the work of mercenaries? But how did they get behind us? Could it be that they fell from the sky?" "We launched the first attack 2 days ago, and those people took action at night. That's too fast. Even if they are mercenaries, it's impossible for them to send out their troops in such a short time. They must have bypassed us to attack. There are 50,000 of our soldiers in the city. Even if they are mercenaries, they won't be able to occupy the entire Wulong city if they don't have enough soldiers. It's even more impossible for them to inflict heavy damage on our army. Could it be the work of other countries?" The generals below spoke one after another. They mentioned various possibilities, but they were all rejected one by one. Godun's face darkened. He didn't speak. According to the battle report, the people who came were armed with advanced firearms, so they should be mercenaries. However, the battle report didn't mention the number of soldiers. What did that mean? Did they forget to mention it? That was impossible. There could only be one answer. They still didn't know how many enemies there were. Half of the 50,000-strong army was blasted out of Wulong City. They didn't even know how many enemies there were. How terrifying was that? Didn't that mean that the enemy had a lot of soldiers? However, wasn't the main force of the mercenaries taken away by the Ming dynasty's Duke of Loyalty to attack the Phnom Penh dynasty? Where did the enemy come from? Godun was deep in thought. The generals were also deep in thought. Even Fan Yuhai was deep in thought. The only difference was that Fan Yuhai had locked the enemy on the mercenaries even though he didn't get any accurate information. In his eyes, he was very clear about the military strength of the surrounding countries. Only the mercenaries could break into the city and defeat the 50,000-strong Siamese soldiers in one night. However, how did they appear there? After all, they had only appeared at Wanxiang City 2 days ago and launched their first attack. How could the mercenaries react so quickly? The entire battle took less than 5 days. Even a flying man couldn't have done it. Unless, when he thought of the only possibility, Fan Yuhai's expression changed drastically. Could it be that the mercenaries were already prepared and knew that they would attack Wanxiang City? Hence, they planted a large number of soldiers behind them. If that was the case, once the Siamese army launched their attack, the mercenaries started their attack on Wulong City? Yes, that must be it. If all of this was true, the Ming dynasty's Duke of Loyalty was too good at scheming. His attacks were ruthless, and the military strength behind him was much stronger than what was shown. He even had the ability to split his troops to attack Siamese and the Phnom Penh dynasty. No, it should be more than that. Since he had arranged a backup plan in Siamese, his other ally, the Kingdom of Ava, must have also arranged a backup plan. Hiss! Fan Yuhai sucked in a breath of cold air. At this moment, Fan Yuhai suddenly felt that Yang Chendong was very terrifying. This person was not only good at calculation, but also had a more outstanding military vision than ordinary people. He also had powerful firearms and an unknown military strength. How could such an opponent be defeated? Question marks flashed in his mind. At this moment, Fan Yuhai suddenly had an idea. He wanted to leave this place as soon as possible. He had repeatedly challenged the mercenaries and Yang Chendong. First, he led the Lansong Kingdom into the whirlpool of war. Then, the Lansong Kingdom was destroyed. Then, he had the idea of forming an alliance between the three countries. However, now that the Phnom Penh dynasty and Siamese Kingdom had been attacked to different degrees, as the initiator, how could he not be targeted by Yang Chendong? If Yang Chendong really wanted to deal with him, would he be able to stay safe with his 5,000 elite cavalry? No, such a person was too dangerous. He had to leave this place first, at least before he had enough strength. He would not appear in front of Yang Chendong. When he appeared again, he had to make all the necessary preparations. After making up his mind, Fan Yuhai did not speak anymore. He did not even have the intention to help General Gordon analyze the situation. He kept his mouth shut. "General, I don't think it's the time to talk about this. Even if Wulong City's provisions have been burned, we have to be prepared to leave this place. Otherwise, if the enemy behind us and the enemy in Wanxiang City attack us from both sides, how are we going to face them? Besides, if the army loses its provisions, it will definitely cause chaos. We have to leave this place quickly while the soldiers below are still unaware. We have to gather new provisions for the next battle." One of the generals said after analyzing the gains and losses. The other generals nodded in agreement. "That's right, General. We have to retreat. Yes, we have to leave. We can't let them attack us from both sides." Gordon slammed the table and said. Then he looked around and fixed his gaze on Fan Yuhai. "General Fan, what do you think?" Fan Yuhai wanted to say, "If we leave now, aren't you afraid that the mercenaries will attack us halfway?" However, he thought that if he reminded Gordon, he would definitely hold his ground. Who knew what the mercenaries would do? If they were really attacked from both sides, wouldn't it be very dangerous for him and Gordon to stay together? Since that was the case, it was better to let them leave. At that time, whether or not they were attacked by the mercenaries, they would escape halfway. At least he would be safe. The world was big, but he was the most important. Fan Yuhai nodded. "It's time to leave. How about this? I will bring my 5,000 cavalrymen and retreat last, just in case." Sigh. "Speaking of which, my cavalrymen were not of much use in this siege. I feel ashamed." He wanted to hear Fan Yuhai's opinion, but he did not expect him to take the initiative to bring up the rear. This made Gordon's eyes brighten. He sighed and said, "General Fan is a righteous man. Thank you for your hard work. Don't worry, if the mercenaries catch up from behind, you only have to hold them off for a while. I will send reinforcements to support you." "Okay, thank you." Fan Yuhai stood up and cupped his fist with a sincere face. However, he thought coldly in his heart, "Who would believe that you would come to my aid when I am attacked?" With someone bringing up the rear, it was much easier to retreat. In order to prevent any accidents from happening, Gordon decided on the spot to retreat now. They would rush through the night and try to reach Wulong City the day after tomorrow. At that time, they would guard the city tightly and ask the king for rations so that they could regroup and fight again. With all the generals present, there was no need for a meeting. Soon, the order was given and the generals went to prepare. After 2 hours, the army had already packed up their tents and started to retreat towards Wulong City. Then, the rest of the army followed suit and left Wanxiang City in a long line. On the tower in the south of Wanxiang City, General He Guang was looking at the scene before him through a pair of binoculars. Because of the landmines, Luan Xiaochen did not stay on the tower. There were too many things in the city that he needed to deal with, so he left everything here to He Guang. Because of this, he was also confused when he saw that the enemy had actually started to retreat. Chapter 6:21. He raised his binoculars again and again to make sure that he was not mistaken. The enemy had indeed retreated. He quickly said to the messenger beside him, "Go and inform Governor Luan that the situation has changed. Ask him to come here as soon as possible." Half an hour later, Luan Xiaochen arrived at the gate tower on his bicycle. When he arrived at the gate tower, he listened to He Guang's report and raised his binoculars as well. He saw the Siamese army retreating. How long have they been doing this? Luan Xiaochen put down his binoculars and was puzzled. Reporting to the governor, "They have been retreating since half an hour ago. I have calculated that the number of retreating soldiers has exceeded 10,000, and it seems like they will continue to retreat," He Guang reported with a face full of doubts. "So, they have really retreated? But why?" Luan Xiaochen could not figure it out and frowned. I don't know," He Guang answered honestly. He wanted to ask Governor Luan why. He Guang knew that it would be useless to ask He Guang. He thought for a moment and said to the messenger beside him, "Turn on the radio immediately and contact the 6th young master. Report the situation here as it is." The waiting time was always long. On the open land 5 miles away from the gate tower, the Siamese army was still retreating. Just from the looks of it, they should be serious. However, This was even more puzzling. The attack was only temporarily blocked, and only a few thousand of the 100,000 soldiers died. Why did they stop fighting? The morale of this army was too low. "Sir, the sixth young master has called back." The messenger ran all the way to Wan Xiaochun and handed him a telegram. Wan Xiaochun, who was puzzled, quickly picked up the telegram. After a few glances, he could not help but shout excitedly, "Good, good, ha, ha." He Guang, who was beside him, was even more confused. "Governor Wan, what did the sixth young master say?" "Here, take a look at it yourself." Wan Xiaochun was in a good mood at that moment, so he casually handed the telegram to He Guang. After reading it once, her eyes widened in disbelief. She couldn't help but read it again. Then, with a surprised look on her face, she said, "The sixth young master said that the mercenaries attacked Wulong City and defeated the 50,000 Siamese soldiers there. They even burned the enemy's provisions? This is too powerful, but where did the mercenaries come from?" Wan Xiaochun also couldn't figure it out, but he wouldn't show it in front of his subordinates. As a superior, it was appropriate for him to remain mysterious in front of his subordinates. Thus, he chuckled and said, "This is not something you should consider. You only need to know that Wanxiang City is safe." Yes, He Guang also knew that he couldn't be fully trusted by the mercenaries right now. There were some things that he couldn't ask casually. However, now that Wanxiang City was safe and the Siamese soldiers were retreating, he was wondering if he could take advantage of the situation. Thus, he told Wan Xiaochun his thoughts. When he heard He Guang say that he wanted to go out and fight a drowning dog, Wan Xiaochun thought for a while and shook his head. "We have too few soldiers. If we go out, it will be dangerous. If the enemy counterattacks, the consequences will be unimaginable. It's better not to take the risk. There is only one company of soldiers guarding the city, 2 auxiliary battalions, and 10,000 Laotian mercenaries. If they really went out, only the auxiliary soldiers of the Lung Vanguard would be able to take advantage of the situation. However, their numbers were too small. Instead of taking the risk and reaping huge rewards, it was better to stay put. After all, there would be more battles in the future." These were the words of an experienced strategist. Wan Xiaochun made this decision because the number of soldiers he had was limited. They could defend the city, but it wasn't enough to go out and kill the enemy. Secondly, the sixth young master's telegram didn't ask them to attack. Thus, the sixth young master probably meant the same thing. Thus, they watched as the Siamese army left. Of course, there was an even more important reason. Defending Wanxiang City was a mission in the first place, and it was enough as long as he could complete this mission. What he had was only a standing army, and not an invincible main force. 5 miles away from the city, the Siamese military camp set off. Fan Yuhai and his 5,000 cavalrymen had already gathered at a spot and were watching the scene unfold with indifference. If one took a closer look, they would realize that they had already prepared everything. Once something unexpected happened, not only would they not cover the retreat, but they would also rush out at the first moment and escape without a trace. That was the truth. Fan Yuhai might have said that he would bring up the rear, but once Wanxiang City's city gates opened, he would definitely be the first to escape with the cavalry. After all, they were faster on horseback than the foot soldiers. Fan Yuhai's nerves were stretched taut. When the sky turned dark, all the Siamese army had retreated. However, there was still no movement from Wanxiang City. This made Fan Yuhai heave a sigh of relief. "All right, now that everything is fine, we should leave." Fan Yuhai seemed to be talking to himself. Then, he scanned his surroundings for a moment. He knew that after leaving this time, he didn't know when he would return. Perhaps he would never return. The Siamese army left Wanxiang City in a long line. Close to 100,000 soldiers formed a formation that spanned more than 10 miles. When the sky turned dark, they lit up their torches. From afar, it was even more spectacular. On the way back to Wulong, the mercenaries led by Lung Song had already set up an ambush in the dense forest on both sides of the road. Everyone had a good night's sleep during the day. Now, everyone was full of energy. They held onto their steel spears and stared at the retreating Siamese army with sparkling eyes. Gordon was quite capable. Although they were retreating, they didn't panic. The 1,000-man teams were well-coordinated and didn't have any obvious weaknesses. Once one of the 1,000-man teams was attacked, the other 1,000-man teams would be able to provide support immediately. With the front and rear looking after each other, they would be able to minimize the losses. An ordinary army would be helpless against such a formation. However, it was a pity that they were facing a mercenary army. Furthermore, the mercenary army was prepared and had won the battle. Therefore, they were at a disadvantage in terms of morale and preparation. What was the purpose of ancient wars? Morale and preparation naturally played a very important role. Currently, the mercenaries had the advantage in these aspects. They had already won half the battle even before the battle started. Furthermore, night battles were their forte. It would be difficult for them to not win this battle. The only thing that mattered was how much they could achieve in this battle. Lung Song seemed to have known that the Siamese army would retreat in an orderly manner. As the commander, he had already come up with a countermeasure. That was to split up the troops. Didn't you have the front and rear looking after each other? Didn't you attack a location and the nearby troops would be able to provide support? Good. What would you do if I suddenly attacked and dealt you a huge blow? Could you really have the front and rear looking after each other? Hence, in the dense forest by the road, the 8 auxiliary battalions were divided into companies. This resulted in 32 small units that were positioned at different locations for the ambush. The 3 Cold Vanguard battalions of the 1st Regiment became the mobile troops. They would provide support wherever the battle was intense. These 3 battalions were further divided into 36 platoons. They were positioned at the surrounding areas of the auxiliary troops. This was to ensure that nothing would go wrong. Just as the mercenary army was about to set up the ambush, the enemy finally appeared. According to the previous plan, the mercenary army did not attack immediately. Instead, they allowed the enemy's vanguard to pass by. Once the enemy's main force entered the area, it would be time for the mercenary army to attack. In the dense forest area, the most unbearable thing for people were the mosquitoes in the forest. Not only were there a lot of them, but they were also large and carried a weak poison. Once bitten, it wouldn't take long for a big blister to form, making it extremely itchy. In such an environment, ambushing and staying here for a long time was a test of one's willpower. Speaking of which, these mosquitoes would not consider whether or not they would bite you just because of your skin color or your intentions. As long as you had flesh and blood, even if you were a wild beast, you would be a delicious meal in their eyes. After ambushing here for more than 2 hours, all of the mercenaries' faces were covered with all kinds of large, swollen bumps. If they had not worn gloves in advance, their hands would have been covered with bumps. This would have greatly affected their accuracy. Endure it, endure it. The same firm voice echoed in every mercenary's heart. The Cold Vanguard Battalion did not want to be looked down upon by the auxiliary troops. They had to endure it. Besides, they had undergone similar training countless times. Even though their faces were itchy, it was not that they could not endure it. It was just that it was a test of willpower. The auxiliary troops were also enduring it. They wanted to perform better so that they could join the Cold Vanguard Battalion. Before the battle, Commander Lung Song had said that after this battle, those who performed well would have a chance to join the Cold Vanguard Battalion. Even the 6th Young Master had agreed to this. The political department was already prepared to vet them. This was a chance to join the Cold Vanguard Battalion. This was the wish of almost all the auxiliary troops. In order to achieve this goal, in order to return home in glory, in order to prove that they were the strongest young men, what was a mosquito bite? They just had to endure it and endure it. As mentioned earlier, mosquitoes would not target a single person. While the mercenaries were enduring the inhumane bites, the Siamese soldiers who were walking on a road beside the forest were also suffering from the same bites. The only difference was that the further one was from the forest, the lower the chance of being bitten. Oh, these damn mosquitoes, they bit me. It hurts, it's so itchy. Chapter 622. That's right. I've killed 3, but it's not enough. They keep coming at me. It's so annoying. After the soldier heard his companion's complaint, not only did he agree, but he also waved the torch in his hand from time to time, as if he wanted to use this action to drive away the annoying mosquitoes. "You idiots, can't you stay away from the forest? The farther you are, the safer you will be, just like me," another soldier said proudly. Everyone noticed that the soldier was about to leave the army and walk to the other side of the road. It was far enough from the forest, so it was naturally safer. "That's right. You're smart." The other soldiers immediately agreed. Then, more and more people started to leave the forest and walk to the other side of the road. The Chiliarch naturally noticed this, but he did not say anything. He was also on the other side of the road. After all, the mosquitoes would not let him go just because he was a general. They were a very fair species. The general did not reprimand them. Some timid soldiers also moved to the left side of the road, trying their best to keep a distance from the forest. It was dangerous to do so. Some people had already raised the possibility that there might be mercenaries ambushing them in the forest at night. If there were, the closer they were to the forest, the safer they would be. Once they were attacked, the closer they were, the faster they could rush to the enemy. This would ensure their safety to the greatest extent. Now, the army was walking on the left side of the road. Although it was only a dozen meters away, if a fight broke out, the dozen meters would be an uncrossable trench. At first, this idea was very popular. However, as night fell and more mosquitoes began to appear, no one said it anymore. What kind of joke was this? They were standing on the main road and were already as far away from the forest as possible. There were still so many mosquitoes. If they stayed in the forest, wouldn't they become a lump of meat? Who could withstand such a test? At least, if the Siamese soldiers thought that they could not withstand it, they would naturally think that others could not withstand it. In this way, the so-called threat in the forest seemed to be non-existent. This also made the Siamese soldiers who were walking along the edge of the forest let down their guard. They only focused on driving away mosquitoes and hurrying on with their journey. In the dense forest, Lung Song was also suffering from mosquito bites. His face was already densely packed with small bumps, and these bumps were still expanding. However, if the other soldiers could endure it, as the division commander, he had no reason not to persist. He gritted his teeth and endured it. Once there are too many mosquitoes, the repellent that the sixth young master had people make is useless. Lung Song sighed softly and stared fiercely at the enemies more than 200 meters away. He decided to kill as many enemies as he could to avenge the mosquito bites tonight. The hour hand of the watch was turning, and with this movement, the enemy's main force had finally entered the forest, and the vanguard of the rear army had also stepped in. After calculating the situation in his mind, Lung Song knew that the time to attack had come. As long as he opened fire, the smell of gunpowder would be able to drive away some of the mosquitoes, let alone during a battle. Who would think about mosquito bites? Lung Song took off a pair of black leather gloves, revealing his uninjured hands. He held a Type 95 pistol tightly, adjusted his breathing, and prepared to shoot. He could even feel the mosquitoes staring at his hands, but he did not care. His eyes were indifferent, and his face was calm. He aimed the muzzle at a captain of the Siamese army. Then, his finger gently pulled the trigger. A bullet flashed through the night like a meteor, leaving a dazzling red trail in the air. Bang! As the gunshot rang out, the enemy Chiliarch fell to the ground. If one could look closely, one would see that the bullet had pierced through his head. His eyes were wide open, and he could not be more dead. This shot was the signal to launch a general attack, and what followed was the dense sound of gunfire. The sound of gunfire seemed to be everywhere. After a wave of attack, the Siamese army lost countless bodies, and their formation was in chaos. Without any defense, and with the torches in their hands, what were they if not live targets? It was not until the second wave of gunfire rang out, and countless Siamese soldiers were killed that the smarter generals came to their senses. They shouted and threw down their torches. One by one, the torches were thrown away or extinguished, and the surroundings were plunged into darkness. The gunfire was not as fierce as before, and only occasionally it could be heard under the moonlight. The power of the flintlock had caught the Siamese soldiers off guard, and it also destroyed their pride. Many of them lay on the ground and did not dare to move, as if they were afraid that they would attract the attention of the mercenaries and become the next live target. Gordon was also attacked, and several of his bodyguard were killed. Under the cover of the other bodyguards, he was pressed to the ground and avoided the danger of being shot. He was protected by his bodyguards, and even if he was discovered, there would be a human shield in front of him, and he would not die. However, this was not what Gordon wanted. At this moment, his face was pale, and he did not know if it was because of the pain of being pressed down by his bodyguards or because he was angry. The siege of Wanxiang City had failed, followed by Wulong City. Now, they were ambushed by the mercenaries, and he did not know how many of his 100,000 soldiers would be lost. As the general leading the army, he felt extremely humiliated. If both sides were to fight fair and square, he would lose because his skills were not as good as his opponent, and there would be nothing to say. However, the mercenaries were simply playing tricks on him. They were either relying on the advantage of firearms, mines, or other weapons, or ambushing him. This made him feel powerless, as if he had punched cotton with all his might. Initially, he was still proud of his long snake formation, and even thought that it would be best if the mercenaries appeared. This way, he would be able to counterattack and win. However, after being ambushed, he realized how wishful his thinking was. He knew to disperse his army, but did the mercenaries not know? Now, it was not just one spot that was attacked, but the entire army. How was he going to break through? The surroundings were pitch black, and all the torches were extinguished. Regardless of whether they were attacked or not, all of the 1,000-men soldiers were lying on the ground. It was as if this was the only way to ensure their safety and survive. Bastard, counterattack! What's the use of extinguishing the torches? Are you waiting for death? Although he was in a sorry state, and in order to save his life, he had to block more than one bodyguard in front of him. However, this did not stop him from reprimanding others and sending them to their deaths. Pass down my order, counterattack. There can't be too many enemies. Otherwise, they wouldn't be hiding and would take advantage of the situation to charge over. Quick, counterattack. I'll kill anyone who doesn't counterattack. Gordon's yelling was heard in the darkness. His yelling was extremely clear in such a quiet atmosphere, and it made many Kiliarch's expressions turn ugly. If they attacked, they might die, but if they didn't attack, they would die too. Thinking that dying in battle would be considered a sacrifice for the country, and at least their families would be safe, some of the Kiliarchs had no choice but to yell at their subordinates. Everyone, stand up and charge forward. The enemy is in the dense forest. As long as we charge forward, they won't have any advantage in close combat. I'll kill anyone who doesn't charge. The Kiliarchs did not forget to say the last sentence. Previously, they were still cursing Gordon for bullying the weak, but now that they thought about it, wasn't it the same for them? After the generals gave their orders, the soldiers were the ones who suffered the most. They did not have the ability to bargain with the generals. Under the orders of the centurions and the supervision of the decharches and corporals, the soldiers at the lowest level were forced to stand up. Then, in groups, they began to approach the dense forest on the right side of the road. If it weren't for the fact that they were worried about being bitten by mosquitoes, they would be standing at the edge of the forest right now. With a single gunshot, they would be able to rush over as quickly as possible and force the mercenaries to engage in close combat with them. But now, it was useless to say anything. In history, there was no such thing as if or if. Everything depended on strength and a trace of luck. The soldiers were forced to get up from the ground one by one and carefully walked towards the dense forest. It seemed as though there were mines buried under their feet. If they were not careful, they would be blown up into the sky by the powerful explosion. However, the attack they expected didn't happen. After walking forward for a distance of 50 meters, gunshots were still heard in front of them. It was as though everything that happened just now was a dream, an illusion. This change gave more people courage, and they stood up as well. Then, they groped their way through the darkness and headed towards the dense forest. Could it be that the enemy retreated after one wave of attacks? That must be it. Otherwise, the gunshots would have been heard long ago. Haha, it seems like there aren't too many enemies. Otherwise, they wouldn't have given up such a good opportunity. If that's the case, what are you waiting for? Let's go. This is our chance to show off. The Siamese soldiers began to talk among themselves. Then, their footsteps began to quicken and become lighter. It was as if the mosquito bites were no longer happening. Bam, 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 bam. Just when the Siamese soldiers thought that they were safe, a barrage of gunshots rang out again. This time, it was as loud as the first wave of attacks. The Siamese soldiers were caught off guard, especially those who were the fastest. They were the first to die. Like harvested wheat, they fell to the ground one after another. Even when they died, their eyes were still wide open, as though they couldn't understand what had happened. Chapter 6:23. Get down, one of the generals shouted. Immediately, the charging Siamese soldiers fell to the ground obediently. Their movements were so fast that it was as if they had practiced this countless times. Poor General Gordon had just stood up under the protection of his bodyguards when gunshots rang out. Once again, he was mercilessly pressed to the ground. He could not help but chew on a piece of mud in his mouth, which made him angry and ashamed at the same time. The sound of gunfire continued. From time to time, figures would rush out of the forest. Then, grenades would fall on the heads of the Siamese soldiers who were close to the forest. Retreat, retreat, crawl backward. Following the explosions, more and more soldiers fell to the ground. Some Kiliarchs hurriedly gave out orders. Then, a shocking scene happened. On the main road, countless people were frantically retreating. With this speed, even if they were the members of Cole Vanguard, some of them would probably pass the test. This should be the effect of potential. When a person was faced with death, he could always explode with unimaginable speed. As the Siamese soldiers retreated to their original positions, the gunshots and grenade explosions gradually stopped. Silence reigned over the land once again. Being tricked once wasn't something to be afraid of. A horse could stumble. However, if he were to fall for the same trick again and suffer a loss, then he would be considered stupid and would not learn from his mistakes. Hence, after this, even when Gordon's roar came from the darkness again, none of the Kiliarchs moved. With the mentality that the law could not punish the majority, if no one moved, could it be that your brother, the great general, would kill all of us Kiliarchs? If he really did that, it would not be long before a mutiny broke out. After shouting so many times that his voice was almost hoarse, the army did not move at all. Gordon gave up shouting. Forget it, forget it. He would just wait like this. Once the sun rose and everyone could see their opponents clearly, it would be time for him to counterattack. He had not believed that he would lose again at that time. This scene was similar to when Chun Bo dealt with the 100,000 soldiers of the Lansang Kingdom. They were also forced to lie on the ground to ensure their safety. The only difference was that the terrain this time was not good. Lung Song had limited manpower and could not capture the 100,000 soldiers again. Pass down the order. The auxiliary soldiers will retreat first. The cold front will be the last to retreat. After dawn, gather at Wanxiang City. Lung Song gave the order reluctantly. He thought that he could fight a good battle, but he was helpless against these cowards. After all, he couldn't let the army charge forward. Firstly, their line of sight would be obstructed, and secondly, their forces were too few. If they really charged forward and engaged in close combat, they would be the ones to suffer. This was an outcome that he absolutely did not want. The mercenaries began to retreat into the depths of the forest in an orderly manner. Then, they turned and headed towards Wanxiang City. The Siamese soldiers on the road did not dare to guess or test the waters. This was because it would mean sacrificing countless lives. No one wanted to die, so they might as well stay where they were. The cold wind blew past them from time to time. Mosquitoes would also take the opportunity to bite them. The Siamese soldiers could only endure and curse in their hearts. They cursed the mercenaries for targeting them. They cursed their general for being useless. What kind of war was this? Time passed slowly and the sky gradually brightened. The dew fell and the mosquitoes were also affected by it. They began to leave one by one. When the white fog dissipated, the Siamese soldiers finally launched their counterattack. They rushed into the forest as if they wanted to perform well. However, what awaited them was no one. Even the cold front, who were the last to retreat, had all retreated an hour ago. Under the protection of his bodyguards, Gordon stood up straight again. However, his eyes were red, indicating that he did not rest well last night. "General, the enemy is no longer in the forest. What should we do next?" All of the major commanders and Kiliarchs began to gather around this general before asking questions with fawning expressions on their faces. After all, they had shown their fearful side last night. Now, they were afraid that their general would settle the score with them. Gordon wanted to settle the score with them. However, if he really dealt with these generals, who would lead the army? If these generals gathered together, they might even turn against him. He could only remember this incident in his heart. He waved his hand and said impatiently, "What else can we do? Continue to retreat. Let the army speed up and rush to Wulong City for breakfast." He could not deal with these generals, but he could still do something. Punishing them for not eating breakfast was a temporary way to vent his anger. Of course, this was also because Gordon wanted to rush back to the city as soon as possible. Once he entered the city, he would be much safer. After this battle, the Siamese army lost another 10,000 soldiers. With less than 90,000 soldiers and 10,000 injured soldiers, the Siamese army finally returned to Wulong City in the evening of the next day. When he entered the city, he saw the destroyed streets and houses. There were even some fireworks that had not been completely extinguished. Gordon knew that this base was finished. It would take at least a few months to rebuild it. This meant that the plan to attack Wanxiang City would have to be abandoned halfway. He would have to return to the capital with shame. Lung Song naturally did not care about what Gordon was thinking. 2 battles, 2 victories. More than 4,000 soldiers wiped out tens of thousands of enemy soldiers. Most importantly, he did not suffer any losses. This result was satisfactory. With a face full of excitement, he arrived at Wanxiang City. Wan Xiaochan had already received the news and was waiting for these heroes with a group of people. What was different from when Gudan entered Wulong City was that good wine and tea had already been prepared. Everyone had a joyful expression on their faces. Wanxiang City was safe. As the governor, Wan Xiaochan was naturally the happiest person. Although he was not afraid of war, he knew that once a battle broke out, the order in the city that had just gotten back on track would be destroyed. He did not know how much he would have to pay to get back on track. Fortunately, the 6th young master had calculated everything. The retreat of the Siamese army was a reality. With the 4,000 soldiers led by Lung Song, even if the enemy attacked again, they would not have to be afraid. With the advantage of weapons, Gordon would definitely return empty-handed. After Lung Song's troops returned to the city, another piece of good news was sent over via telegram. Just yesterday, the Awol dynasty also sent out 50,000 soldiers. However, they were quickly met by the Vietnamese mercenaries Hong Jin and Ruan Jinxing's 20,000 men at the strategic town of Panging Valley in the northwest of Laos. There was no chance for the Awol dynasty to launch a surprise attack, so they happily withdrew their troops. Just like that, Siam and Awa's attacks were disrupted. The people of Laos finally did not have to live in fear anymore. They could continue doing what they were supposed to do. When the news of Laos reached Yang Qindong's ears, the 6th young master at Suing City heaved a sigh of relief. Although all of this was within his expectations, no one could guarantee that there would be no accidents. Now that the dust had settled, he could finally relax and focus all his attention on Suing City. They still haven't sent anyone to negotiate with us? Yang Qindong placed his hands on his waist and stood in front of the temporary headquarters. He looked at the tall city in the distance and asked Tiger's Mane, "Young master, not yet. There's news from the security bureau. Leader Yun is still in the middle of an operation. He should be here soon." Tiger's Mane reported, "Good. Since that's the case, we'll increase the price. Some people just don't learn from their mistakes. Give the order, fire with all you might. I want to see how long they can hold on." Yang Qindong's eyes flashed. Due to his own foundation, He did not have the intention to take down the Phnom Penh dynasty this time. The 5 million Han people in Suwon City were in the process of being transformed, but the news was not ideal. These people were all refugees that the Southern Ming dynasty had to abandon. They were uneducated and were born to hard labor. They were also timid, and all they wanted was to have a bite to eat and survive. For such people to change in a short period of time, to give them confidence and dignity, it was not something that could be done in a day. Although the political department and the publicity department had put in a lot of effort, it was impossible to use it without a year. In addition, they had to learn culture, at least to be able to read, which may take longer. When the two provinces of Vietnam and Laos were established, 200,000 educated youths in Suwon City had been used to take over the entire Phnom Penh dynasty. At least 100,000 educated youths were needed. This reserve was gone, and it would take time to train them again. This was Yang Chendong's difficulty. Without enough foundation, how could he build high-rise buildings? In the end, he decided that this time, he would only fight against the Phnom Penh dynasty. He wanted to show his muscles through this incident to ensure that no one would bully him in Vietnam or Laos when he was not here. The main reason that forced Yang Chendong to make this decision was not only the lack of educated youths, but also the emergence of an unexpected event. The honeymoon period between Baiming and Wallace suddenly ended. The Security Bureau sent news that a war seemed inevitable. The reason turned out to be that Shi Biao, who was in charge of the security of the trade, blackmailed Walla merchants. The close relationship between the two sides suddenly became like fire and water. Chapter 624. Shi Biao was Baiming's Marquis Wu Qing-ho and also the nephew of General Shi Hung. Naturally, his uncle Shi Hung would take responsibility for the trouble he caused. No one knew how it ended up in such a situation where the two sides were about to go to war. Once Baiming was about to go to war with Walla, Yang Chendong had to pay attention to it. He had too many concerns there. He had decided to take a look at the grassland in the north after dealing with the matters in the south. There was a vast land with many strong horses. He wanted to organize an army of cavalry, just like Genghis Khan, to sweep across the Eurasian continent and conquer the world. Before that, the matter of the Golden Bian dynasty must be solved. However, to Yang Chendong's surprise, he did not intend to swallow the other party, but the other party did not intend to negotiate either. Since that was the case, there was no need to be polite. He would just bombard them with artillery fire. This was also a unique way of pressuring them. Yang Chendong ordered, and the 100mm mortar was put to use again. Shells were fired at Suwon City on the opposite side. With each shell falling, countless buildings were destroyed, and countless soldiers and civilians were killed. This was not the first time that the artillery was fired at the city. The powerful destructive power had caused the people in the city to begin a mass migration. After all, no one knew whether the next shell would fall on their heads. Especially Yang Chendong's order was the kind of random bombardment without a set target. Even General De in the city did not know where the next shell would fall. This made him tremble in fear every day, and he did not feel safe at all even if he changed places to sleep every day. All he could do was to keep urging people to return to the country and ask His Majesty to agree to the peace talks. After all, this feeling of living in the shadow of death every day was not good. Golden Bian City, where the capital of the Golden Bian dynasty was located. The top officials of the dynasty had been discussing how to deal with the aggressive mercenaries for a few days, but there was still no consensus. The ministers were divided into two factions. One faction was in favor of war, while the other was in favor of war. Overall, the pro-war faction still had a certain advantage. They had already received news that both Siam and Awad had sent troops to Laos. Once they received good news, the mercenaries would definitely retreat. At that time, it would be time for the pro-war faction to strike and reclaim their lost territory. When King Boromir saw this, he did not respond to the mercenaries' attempt to negotiate. He wanted to be the first king to defeat the mercenaries. However, he was destined to be disappointed. Both the Siamese and Ava armies had retreated. It was only because of the lack of transportation that the news did not reach his ears. The residence of the right Prime Minister of Golden Rim City was located in a very prosperous area of the city. Two 2-meter-high stone lions stood in front of the gate day and night, showing the noble status of the owner of the house. In fact, in the Golden Bean dynasty, the right Prime Minister Dun did have a lot of power, second only to the king. He was on par with the left Prime Minister Ding Ding Wei. Perhaps to deal with the rumors of discord between the two, or perhaps because King Palomo did not wish to see his subjects too united and thus threaten his own position. The two ministers have been arguing over various issues all this while. Sometimes the left minister would win, and sometimes the right minister would win. This time, facing the issue of whether to fight or to negotiate with the mercenaries, the two prime ministers had different opinions. The left Prime Minister Ding Ding Wei was in favor of war, while the right Prime Minister Dun was in favor of peace. Under the leadership of the two of them, the court officials were naturally divided into two factions and followed their lead. Because the king had certain expectations for Siam and Ava, the current situation was that the left Prime Minister had a slight advantage, while the right Prime Minister was slightly passive. Today, after the court, the right Prime Minister Dun returned to his residence with an unhappy face. He went straight to the backyard. As if it had become a habit, Yunk liked to go to the backyard of some important ministers. It seemed to be safer there. This time, he was staying in the backyard of the right Prime Minister's residence. Duan arrived with a displeased expression. When he saw Skylark's seat resting on a recliner with his eyes closed, he couldn't help but complain even before he walked over. Sir Yin, I can really sleep. Don't you know that we're about to send troops to Suing City? Send troops? Yunk, who was lying on the recliner, slowly opened his eyes. Yes, the left Prime Minister Ding Ding Wei is leading more and more officials to suggest sending troops. I can't stop it. I think you should leave Golden Bean City quickly. Duce seemed to like to see Yunk's surprised look. From the moment this person appeared until now, he had been acting as if nothing had happened, which made him feel very displeased. No matter what, he was still the right minister of the country, with a high position and power. Yet, just because he had accepted 200,000 taels of silver from the other party, he had not only detained the other party at home, but he was also running around in the imperial court for the other party. Now that the situation was becoming more and more unfavorable, he had already decided to stop. As for the 200,000 taels of silver he received before, he had spent a lot of effort on this trip. Didn't he need to be compensated? Oh. Yunk blinked his eyes, then leaned his head back and began to rest again. Dun, who had turned his head and said this, was still waiting to see Yunk's panicked look. The other party might even beg him. If he was happy, it would not be a problem to accept some money from the other party to ensure his safety. If he was unhappy, then he would just wave his hand and drive him away. What a joke. Do you really think that mercenaries are the best in the world? Why don't you look at the situation outside? The mercenaries have become an existence that everyone wants to beat up. He turned his head to the side and waited for a few breaths of time, but there was no movement at all. Out of curiosity, he turned around to take a look and saw Yun Ke lying down with a satisfied and comfortable look on his face. He immediately became angry. Mr. Yin, didn't you hear what I said just now? I'll tell you. Without waiting for him to explain the seriousness of the matter, a piece of white paper with words written on it appeared in front of him. The other end of the paper was gently held by Yunk. What? What is this? His face was filled with doubt. Could this be the banknote that the other party gave him to save his life? But it didn't seem like it. With curiosity in his heart, Dun still reached out to take it. He wanted to see what the other party was up to. If he still dared to play tricks with him, then he would definitely let the other party know that he, the Horse Lord, also had 3 eyes. He took the paper and found that it was indeed not a banknote. There were only a few lines of words written on it. Out of instinct, he looked at the words one by one. Along with it, his originally condescending and arrogant expression also changed. After reading it for the first time, his arrogant expression had already disappeared. After reading it for the second time, cold sweat began to appear on his forehead. After reading it for the third time, the way he looked at Yunk had completely changed. Previously, it was a condescending look, but now it was filled with great shock and even a hint of flattery. Mr. Young, where did this come from? Are you joking? Slowly opening his eyes, Skylark chuckled. Joking? Do you think I would joke about this with the right Prime Minister? Let me tell you, this is the battle report I just received. It's 100% accurate. How about it? You should know what will happen next, right? At this time, Yunk was very certain and was full of confidence. People said that a weak country had no diplomacy, and diplomacy could be divided into several types. For example, their infiltration work was also a diplomatic method. Yunk was very capable, but first, he still needed a platform that could give him a chance to perform. The mercenaries were getting stronger step by step, and winning every battle was a platform for him to perform. It was with this guarantee that he could carry out his work like a fish in water. He could use all his methods and perform wonderful infiltration battles. This time, the mercenaries did not let him down. When everyone thought that they would suffer heavy losses and even lose their status, who would have thought that under the command and planning of the sixth young master, the scales of victory would lean towards him again? Yunk was still lying there, and he didn't even have the intention to get up. But now, Dunn didn't mean to blame him, or he couldn't care less about it. He was standing there and constantly wiping his cold sweat, thinking about the situation that the Gilded Dynasty would face next. What was written on the paper was the situation at the front line. It was sent to Skylark by wireless telegram. It clearly recorded the defeat of the Siamese army and the failure of the Owl army. They had no choice but to retreat. What was written on it was what the Gilded Dynasty relied on before. If what was written on it was true, then the Gilded Dynasty would have no reinforcements, and the whole country would be in danger. As the right Prime Minister of country, Dunn naturally knew what this meant. In the worst-case scenario, the mercenaries would be like beasts coming out of the mountains. They could open their bloody mouths and bite the Gilded Dynasty at will. If they wanted to, it was not impossible for them to bite the Gilded Dynasty to death. Thinking of such a result, and thinking that His Majesty wanted to continue to send more troops to Suing City, wasn't that tantamount to angering the mercenaries? At that time, there would be no need for peace talks. They would just fight until one side was crippled. But no matter how he looked at it, it seemed that only the Gilded Dynasty would be crippled. Dunn's face changed again and again. At this moment, his mind was spinning rapidly. He slowly came up with an idea. That was to take the initiative to ask for peace before the other side sent out troops. A slap would never hit a smiling face. As long as their posture was humble, it was still possible to negotiate successfully. After all, the army of the Golden Bean Dynasty had not been completely damaged. They still had the power to fight back. Once the other two allies saw that they were resisting desperately, they might send troops for the second time. Chapter 6:25. The opportunity was right in front of him. Duin, who had made up his mind, no longer had that mocking expression on his face. Instead, he put on a flattering smile and took half a step forward. Sir Yun, can you open your eyes and tell this Prime Minister what the Duke of Loyalty and Courage has in mind? After all, we are now neighboring countries. It's better not to hurt our relationship. Dunn took the initiative to lower his head. Yunk was not surprised by this. If there were still people who wanted to start a war with the mercenaries after receiving this information, they would either have already given up on life and death, or they would have other ideas. He could not help but sigh in his heart. The sixth young master also sent a telegram, saying that they could agree to the peace talks, but they had to try their best to obtain benefits. This time, Yang Qindong did not act like he did with the Jiaoji and Lansang kingdoms. He did not send troops to destroy the kingdoms. In the end, it was not that he had become merciful or that his ambition had been satisfied. On the contrary, everything was done for the sake of the overall situation. Without enough resources and manpower, even if they sent troops to destroy the Phnom Penh dynasty, they would only be picking up a mess. Not to mention, if they really fought, the price they would have to pay would be too high. No one could guarantee that Siam and Ava would not send reinforcements again. The mercenaries did not want to face such a situation before they were fully prepared. with the idea of mutual destruction. No one knew what kind of power these two kingdoms would erupt in the face of a life-and-death crisis. Once their armies really entered the Vietnamese and Laos provinces, the losses would be immeasurable. Without sufficient preparation, Yang Shindong did not want to face this situation. Because of this, Yang still had a lot of work to do. Otherwise, he would have already laid his cards on the table with Dwayne. It was either death or surrender, and he would have just made a decision. After sighing in his heart, Skylark finally stood up from the reclining chair and stood in front of Dwayne. Right, Prime Minister, this time it was you who provoked the mercenaries first, and then we sent out our troops. Even if we were to send out our troops, we would inform you beforehand that you would have to give us a definite answer after the emissary returned to Wanxiang City. And it's precisely because of your arrogance and rudeness that we're meeting on the battlefield, isn't it? Yes, yes. Ducey lowered her head like a child who had done something wrong and nodded repeatedly. Some people said that this time it was the mercenaries who started the war without declaring war, but that was not the case. Everything was just as Yunk had said. The emissary from Laos had given them a chance, but no one had taken it seriously at that time. That was why Shangding City was suddenly breached and Zhujing City's 100,000 soldiers were defeated. All right, since Right Chief Minister has already admitted that it was your fault this time, then whether my mercenary army will fight or shake hands with you will depend on your performance and what you are willing to pay. In short, this time, don't take my words seriously. Otherwise, you won't be able to buy medicine for regret anywhere. All right, I'll wait for you here. You can also go and verify the authenticity of the information. In fact, there's no need to verify it. Your scouts should be able to send the news back in 2 days. But if you haven't made a decision by then, my mercenary army will take the initiative to make the decision for you. No. Du In kept shaking his head. Previously, because he had placed his hopes on the allies of the two countries, he wanted to send troops to the front line to pressure the mercenaries. Since he knew that his allies had been defeated or had retreated, it was very clear what to do. Duin's attitude was arrogant and even a little arrogant, but when he left, he bowed with every step, like a child seeking advice from a teacher. He was extremely respectful. After finally leaving the backyard, Duin's expression returned to its serious state. Men, prepare a sedan. I want to enter the palace to see His Majesty. It was not that Duin didn't doubt the authenticity of the information provided by Yunk. But Yunk had already made it clear that he would not wander around and would wait here, and the news would be confirmed in 2 days. Did this person eat a bear's heart and leopard's guts to joke about such a matter? If everything was true, then it was necessary for him to report the situation to the king. It was better to be prepared than to not know anything at all. In the king's palace, Du In stood in the side hall. Opposite him sat King Boromir. Boromir was a little fat, and he was wearing a golden royal robe. He narrowed his eyes. Right, Prime Minister, I have thought about it. The left Prime Minister's words are not unreasonable. Since Siam and Ava have already sent news, they will definitely send troops. As allies, we should also send more troops to the front line to pressure the mercenaries. Boromir was very clear about the reason why Du In wanted to see him. In the morning, the two prime ministers had been arguing in the court. In the end, Duin's faction became weaker, and even he, the king, leaned towards Ding Dingwei's opinion and continued to send reinforcements. Boromir did not understand why Du In wanted to see him. Could it be that he wanted to continue persuading him? Your Majesty, this is the information I received. Please take a look. Duin did not explain anything. He only presented the information he received from Yunk. He believed that once the king saw this, his attitude would change drastically. You just received this information? Boromir looked at Du In with a puzzled gaze. The right prime minister did not have the authority to gather information. So where did he get this information from? Puzzled, Boromir took the paper with the words written on it from the eunuch beside him. After looking at it casually, his eyes widened and his body began to tremble. In the end, even his hands that were holding the paper were trembling. Right Prime Minister, where did you get this information? Why didn't I know about it? Boromir suddenly raised his head and looked at Du-in with a terrifying gaze. Your Majesty, this information was sent to my residence by a merchant who claimed to be from Laos. I only saw it when I returned to my residence. Du-in naturally would not reveal that Yunk was in his residence. Who knew if the king would accuse him of colluding with the enemy in a fit of anger? Besides, he was counting on his relationship with Yunk to gain more benefits in the future. He had to hide this person well. A merchant from Laos? Boromir was not very satisfied with this answer. He wanted to ask why such a merchant did not look for him or any other officials, but the right prime minister. But before Boromir could ask, Du-in took the initiative to explain, Your Majesty, my butler said that the Laos merchant will come looking for me again. But in my opinion, this is not important. What is important is whether the information is true or not. If it is, what should we do next? Right, according to the right prime minister, is this news true? Boromir seemed to have woken up the person in his dream. Boromir's voice carried a hint of urgency as he asked. In fact, it did not matter how the information came about. The most important thing was whether it was true or not. If it's true, it's a big mistake to send troops to the front. What's wrong? The other two allies have retreated. Do you want to fight head-on with the mercenaries with the Golden Border Dynasty's powerful army? This, in my opinion, regardless of whether it is true or not, there is no smoke without fire. We have to prepare for a backup plan. Du-in raised his head. He wanted to say that since he was the one who sent the information, of course, he would believe it to be true. But he would not say that. He wanted the king to figure it out himself. At the same time, he wanted to use this as an excuse to trick some people, so he could not be too sure. Yes, it is necessary to prepare for a backup plan. Boromir kept nodding, but soon he shook his head. But we have to be careful. Someone might be deliberately spreading false information to mislead us. So, summon the left prime minister to the palace for a meeting. In the end, Boromir did not make a decision. He wanted to summon the others to listen to their opinions. When he heard that the king wanted to summon the left prime minister, Du-in's eyes flashed with excitement. He knew the king too well. The king liked to listen to everyone's opinions, as if that was the best way to make the right choice. But he had forgotten that the truth was often in the hands of only a few people. The king summoned the left prime minister, Ding-Ding-Wei, in his official robe, appeared in the side hall. Ding-Ding-Wei was tall and slender. He looked to be in his 50s. His eyes were not big, but they were very spirited and gave people a feeling of wisdom. Your subject greets your majesty. When he entered the side hall, Ding-Ding-Wei bowed to the king according to the rules. Left prime minister, please rise. Come, bring this over. When Ding-Ding-Wei entered the hall, Boromir's expression had already returned to normal. He looked calm and relaxed. Obviously, he wanted to see the debate between the two prime ministers before making a decision. With the demeanor of a prime minister, Ding-Ding-Wei unhurriedly took the paper that the eunuch presented to him. First, he gave a cursory glance. His eyes immediately widened. Then, he carefully read it twice. After that, he did not immediately speak. Instead, he slowly closed his eyes as if he was thinking about something. King Boromir was not in a hurry. He seemed to be used to the left prime minister's way of doing things. He sat there calmly and did not say anything. On the other side, Du-in was also not in a hurry. This was a trap to begin with. He had even thought about what choice Ding-Ding-Wei would make. He was just waiting for him to jump in. After about 5 or 6 breaths, Ding-Ding-Wei finally opened his eyes. He cupped his fists and said to Boromir, Your Majesty, may I know where this information came from? Chapter 626. For the left prime minister to say this, it was clear that he did not believe that this was news from the army. He knew very well that regarding the movements of the other two countries, it would take at least a day after tomorrow for definite news to arrive. Now that it had arrived, it could only mean that this news did not come from official channels. Haha, the left prime minister is indeed amazing. This news didn't come from the military. It was sent by the right prime minister. Boromir seemed to be very satisfied with the left prime minister's performance and didn't forget to praise him. The right Prime Minister sent it? Ha ha. Ding Dingwei laughed. Originally, he was suspicious of this news because they were enemies with the mercenaries. Of course, he had done his research on the strength of the mercenaries. In his opinion, although the mercenaries were powerful, their weakness was also very obvious. They were too few in number. They might be able to deal with any one country, but if it was 1 against 3, they wouldn't be able to do it. But now, the news said that the armies of Siam and Ava had sent out their troops and were defeated. It seemed too unreal. This was already suspicious. Now that he knew that the news came from the right Prime Minister, Ding Dingwei instinctively thought that it was fake news. As for why this news came, it was very simple. It was because Dun wanted to prevent him from sending reinforcements to the front line. Because the two of them had different political views, once the reinforcements were sent, it meant that the other side had lost the battle. Oh, why is the left Prime Minister laughing? No one knew what Borimov was thinking when he said this. But from his words, it was clear that he was a person who wasn't afraid of things getting out of hand. Your Majesty, please forgive me for being rude. Now, I would like to ask the right Prime Minister a few questions. Is that all right? Ding Dingwei still smiled and asked Borimov for permission. I believe the right Prime Minister won't mind, right? Borimov nodded with a smile. This was equivalent to agreeing on behalf of Dun. Of course. The confident Dun nodded reservedly. Then, he looked at Ding Dingwei and said, if the left Prime Minister has any questions, feel free to ask. I will answer truthfully. At this moment, Dun's expression was very calm. There was even a hint of confidence on his face. When Ding Dingwei saw all of this, for some reason, his heart couldn't help but tremble. As an old rival, he knew all too well what kind of person Dun was. For the sake of fighting for power and profit, they would do anything. Such people were often willing to turn black into white. They could be said to have mastered the art of thick black. Because of this person had done too many things that made people feel guilty. It was difficult to describe him as confident. But now he was actually so calm. Could it be that the information was true? As soon as this idea flashed through his mind, it was quickly rejected by Ding Dingwei himself. If it was true, His Majesty would not have summoned him. Since His Majesty had called him here, it could only mean one thing. Even His Majesty was skeptical about this information. Once he and His Majesty both approved of this information, the matter of sending more troops to the front lines will be delayed indefinitely. This meant that the other party had won this battle, which also meant that the other party was stronger than him. When he thought of this, Ding Dingwei threw the suspicion that had just arisen to the back of his mind. Right, Prime Minister, may I ask where did you get this information? To be honest, left Prime Minister, this information was sent to my residence by a merchant who claimed to be from Laos. Duen, who was already prepared, replied calmly. Laos merchant? I wonder if Right Prime Minister has seen him with your own eyes? When he heard that the source of the information was so childish, Ding Dingwei was even more certain of his guess. This must be a smokescreen thrown out by Du in order to win the battle of whether or not to send troops. Since he knew what was going on, he definitely couldn't let the other party succeed. No, Du in answered very straightforwardly. But he didn't forget to add, although I haven't seen him, I still believe this information. So according to my opinion, whether or not to send troops to Suwon City needs to be carefully considered. Ha ha. This answer finally made Ding Dingwei unable to hold back his laughter. If it wasn't for the following explanation, perhaps he wouldn't be so certain. But since he took the initiative to mention the issue of sending troops, it was tantamount to revealing 300 taels of silver here. After being the left Prime Minister for so many years, Ding Dingwei believed that his ability to observe people's expressions had reached a very high level. Duan's words were tantamount to confirming his previous guess. Since he had already made his decision, Ding Dingwei didn't look at Duan anymore. Instead, he turned to Borimov and cupped his fists. Your Majesty, in my opinion, this information can't be trusted. It's completely groundless. So I ask Your Majesty to make a decision and allow us to send reinforcements to Suwon City. When the time is right, we will go all out to counterattack and recover the lost land. This will raise the prestige of our country, as well as the prestige of our king. Ding Ding Wei finally made his move. Du En, who had been waiting impatiently, also turned to Boromov and cupped his fists. Your Majesty, I believe this information is true. It's the same as my previous guess. So I'm sure Your Majesty will be cautious in sending troops. I can even guarantee with my official position that if this information isn't true, I'm willing to resign in 2 days and retire to my hometown. At this moment, Boromov and Ding Ding Wei were shocked by Duin's words. This was a scene that they hadn't expected at all. Originally, after hearing Ding Ding Wei's words, Boromov could basically confirm that this was a fake information that Du En had deliberately created to delay the sending of reinforcements. He was still a little angry about this. He could allow the 2 prime ministers to fight each other, but the prerequisite was that they couldn't disrupt the development of the country. Otherwise, he wouldn't hesitate to chop off their heads. But suddenly, Du En was so confident that he would use his authority as a stake. At this moment, Boromov hesitated. Boromov wasn't the only one who thought so. Left Prime Minister Ding Ding Wei was also caught off guard by Duin's move. What's going on? It's just a plan to delay the arrival of reinforcements. Why did he make such a huge bet? Why did the right Prime Minister dare to make such a huge bet? What did he rely on? Ding Ding Wei looked at Dun seriously, but he couldn't see anything from Dun's face. Especially at this moment, Dun intentionally closed his eyes. This made Ding Ding Wei feel that he didn't know where to start and analyze. The side hall fell silent. Both the king and the left prime minister were shocked by Du En's bold words. They couldn't help but wonder if they were wrong. Du En opened his eyes and said, "If this information is true, not only should we stop sending reinforcements, but we should also find a way to negotiate with the mercenaries. The sooner we negotiate, the more sincere we will be and the less we will have to pay. On the other hand, when the situation is settled, we will have to pay several times the price if we want to negotiate with them." Du En's words couldn't be more apt to describe him now. Du En's words were completely for the sake of the Golden Border dynasty and had nothing to do with any power struggle. King Boromir was indeed frightened by Du En's boldness. He couldn't help but hesitate. But before he could say anything, Left Prime Minister Ding Ding Wei also opened his mouth and said in the same shocking tone, "I think this news is fake. Although the mercenaries are powerful, their military strength is limited. It is impossible for them to stop the armies of Siam and Ava at the same time. This is the right time to send reinforcements. I'm also willing to guarantee that if I am wrong, I will retire and return to my hometown." Well, Tin Wei had also put in a lot of effort. His words were so certain that Boromir was in a dilemma. Normally, such a thing wouldn't happen. The word official was always there. Real officials, especially important ministers, spoke with a sense of propriety. Even if they were more than 90% sure, they wouldn't be so certain. They would always leave a way out for themselves, right? But today, the 2 prime ministers had put their official positions on the line, and their opinions were so different. This was so abnormal that it made Boromir even more hesitant. On the other hand, Du En was first surprised, then he was overjoyed. Someone had finally jumped into the pit. It was his old rival. He really wanted to shout out loud to vent his excitement. He was so excited in his heart, but on the surface, Du En still suppressed his excitement, cupped his fists, and said to Ding Ding Wei, "Good. Lord Left Prime Minister, if that's the case, we might as well make a bet. We will see the result in 2 days. But I still have one thing to say. If we want to negotiate with the mercenaries then, we will have to pay a higher price. Let's make a bet. But I still support sending reinforcements. If we send reinforcements too late, we can't afford to suffer any losses at the front line," Ding Ding Wei said firmly. Then he stopped looking at Du En and focused all his attention on King Boromir. Obviously, he was listening to the king's orders. The 2 prime ministers had put their official positions on the line and spoke with great confidence. This way, Boromir was the one who had a headache. This was different from what he had expected. He wanted to see which side was right and support. But now that both sides were so strong, how could he make a decision? Boromir wanted to put his hands into his hair to calm down, but he knew that if he did so, it would be very unbecoming of him as a king. But in front of the two prime ministers, he had to give an explanation. After thinking about it, he decided to continue mediating. If he couldn't make the decision, then he would let the facts make the decision. All right, since the two prime ministers are so confident in their negotiations, why don't we all calm down and wait for a while? There should be news in 2 days. At that time, this king will know how to make a decision. Chapter 6:27. The king actually chose to wait, causing Ding Ding Wei's expression to change. Your Majesty, you can't do that. This is exactly what some people are trying to do. If there are no reinforcements coming from the front, it will be a big problem. Your Majesty, what we should do now isn't to send reinforcements. Instead, we should immediately send a peace envoy to contact the mercenaries. This is the only way to resolve this matter with the smallest price. A long delay may lead to trouble. When also called out, he looked very anxious, but only he knew how happy he was. He had already dug a hole for Ding Ding Wei. Now he just had to wait 2 days to see the results. As for whether the king would agree to the peace talks now, he wasn't the one who would suffer a loss. Since the king wasn't anxious, why should he be anxious? The two prime ministers seemed to have the intention to quarrel again. Boromir immediately felt a headache coming on. He couldn't help but say in a slightly angry tone, all right. It's just 2 days later. Nothing major will happen. This matter is settled. Don't say anything else." The king was angry. Whether it was Ding Ding Wei or Dun, they knew when to stop. They just glared at each other and left the palace after saluting. Not long after the two of them left, the whole story began to spread. First, some of the important ministers knew about this matter. Soon, the commoners on the streets were also very clear about it. King Boromir didn't say anything about it. He even knew that the two prime ministers must have deliberately spread the news in order to undermine each other. It was better for him to remain uninvolved in this matter. This way, he would be able to seize the initiative. Even the king was prepared to watch the show, and so were the officials and commoners. Soon, they formed two factions and began to have an intense discussion about who would win. The combat strength of the mercenaries naturally became the main topic of discussion. Those who supported Du-In would naturally say that the mercenaries were powerful and that they were omnipotent. Those who supported Ding Ding Wei would naturally say that no matter how powerful the mercenaries were, they were too few in number. It was absolutely impossible for them to win a war against the three countries. Du-In's words were just to delay the reinforcements to support the front line. It was just to tear down the left prime minister's platform. This kind of action that sacrificed the interests of the country for one's own personal reputation was really too despicable. If it could be proven that Du-In was lying 2 days later, then he should be charged with the crime of harming the country. The people who supported both sides were still having an intense debate. There was no victory or defeat, but the mercenaries' reputation had already penetrated deep into the hearts of the commoners. This was especially true for the people who had escaped from Shangding City. Some of them had come to the capital, and through their mouths, they had described the mercenaries as incomparably terrifying. In the end, the mercenaries' reputation had been greatly increased. This was something that even Yunk had not expected. However, this was good news after all. Yunk quickly ordered his subordinates to spread all kinds of news about the mercenaries. For example, the commoners in Vietnam and Laos were living very well. With Yang Bao, once they obtained citizenship, they wouldn't be bullied anymore. If this news was spread during normal times, not only would it not be accepted, but it would also be criticized as a misconception. However, at this time, when the news was spread, not only did it attract a lot of attention, but it also attracted a lot of attention. The two sides were fighting, and for a while, there was no clear winner. Everyone was watching the show, but there were also people who were very depressed. For example, General Hun's Senator Hun Sun was still very strong. After losing Jujing City and becoming the general of the defeated army, he was escorted back to Golden Rim City. It was said that he was going to be punished. At this moment, his greedy behavior saved him. Because he was greedy for money, he became the child of wealth. As long as he had some influence in the imperial court and could speak, he would send people to give generous gifts to the officials. As a result, there were many people who spoke up for him. In the end, the left and right prime ministers spoke up together. The left prime minister Ding Ding Wei thought that at this time, although Hun's son had some small problems, he could still fight. Moreover, killing a general before the war was not good for the morale of the army, so he spoke up for him. The right prime minister Du In was much simpler. He had received enough money, so he naturally stood up and said a few good words. The two prime ministers had the same opinion, which was a very rare thing. In the end, King Boromir decided to give Hun's son a chance to perform meritorious deeds. He even gave him military power and told him to be prepared to support Su Wong City at any time. But now, the two prime ministers had different opinions and couldn't decide who was better. Instead, Hun Sen stopped supporting Su Wong City. He had no choice but to wait at home. But in his heart, he was cursing Du In. If it wasn't for the right prime minister, he would have been at the front line by now and could even turn the situation around to prove his ability. No matter how the atmosphere in the king's city changed, time didn't stop flowing because of this. It was still moving forward on schedule. After tonight, it would be 2 days tomorrow. It was time for the Golden Rim Dynasty's fast horse scouts to return. The results would be revealed tomorrow. Dwayne became a little nervous. After all, he didn't get the news through his own channels, so after thinking about it, he went to the backyard to look for Skylark because he couldn't sleep. At this time, Yin Ke was not asleep. He seemed to have known that Duin would come. He set up a simple tea shed in the small courtyard and specially prepared an extra chair. Mr. Yin knew that I would come. As soon as Du-in appeared here and saw the furnishings, he was shocked. We will see the results tomorrow. Right, Prime Minister, it is inevitable that you will be impatient. Come over and have a cup of tea to calm your mind. Young had a smile on his face as he casually pointed to the chair opposite him. Du-in also wanted to hear Yun Ke say that there was no problem with the information, so he simply sat down. But just as he sat down, after hearing Yun Ke's next sentence, he suddenly jumped up. Young chuckled and said, "Actually, the previous news was just a tease, right, Prime Minister. The mercenaries at the front line need time to take down Suing City. They were afraid that you would send reinforcements and disrupt the plans of the Duke of Loyalty, so they made this plan." After hearing these words, Du-in was frightened. He couldn't help but jump up. Then he angrily stared at Yun Ke, who was still sitting there and fiddling with the tea, and said, "Mr. Yun, don't make jokes at this time. Otherwise, people will die." This so-called death naturally meant that he would call the guards and servants of the mansion to kill Yun Ke in a fit of anger. Because if all of this was true, he would become a tool in the hands of others. He would lose face and delay the important matters of the country. If that was really the case, he would become a sinner of the Golden Border dynasty. Du-in was really angry. He even had an impulse to kill someone. Yun Ke acted as if he didn't hear anything. After finishing the last procedure of making tea, he raised his head and looked at the angry Du-in and said, "Right, Prime Minister, of course I was joking." Huh? Dwayne's expression changed when he heard this. He didn't even know which sentence was true and which was false. Ha ha ha. Right, Prime Minister, isn't what I said just now what you suspected in your heart? Yun Ke once again pointed to the chair opposite him, indicating that he could sit down. Then he casually said, "I just said what Right Prime Minister was thinking, but this only represents what you think, not what I think. I still have the same words. The news is incomparably accurate. Otherwise, I wouldn't stay here and wait for the confrontation, right?" Yun Ke dared to stay in the mansion, which was already a clear proof. Unless he was playing a death game, otherwise, he wouldn't take such a risk. This sentence finally made Du-in calm down a little. He sat down again. "Mr. Yin, is the news really true? You also know that the outside world is in chaos. If the news is not true, then this Prime Minister is really dead." "Of course it is true. I've already said this. Right, Prime Minister, have you thought about it? Once the news comes tomorrow that proves you are right, what should we do next?" Yun Ke was waiting for Du-in's arrival, not to dispel the other party's worries, but to prepare for the next layout. Du didn't know this. He was now thinking about the problem raised by Yun Quebec. He really didn't think about it. First, it was because he couldn't confirm the accuracy of the news. Second, he wanted to see left Prime Minister Ding Ding Wei make a fool of himself. As for other things, he didn't have time to think about it. But since Yun Ke asked this question, he must have thought about it. This time, Duin asked with an attitude of asking for advice. May I ask, Mr. Yun, what should this Prime Minister do next? You don't have to do anything. Just say that you were sick because you were suspected this time and go back to the mansion to stay. Let the left Prime Minister and the others mess around outside. The higher they jump, the harder they will fall in the future. When the time is right Prime Minister will stand up and shout. That'll be the best time to prove your ability. The smile on Yun Ke's face disappeared, replaced by a face of determination and decisiveness. Duin was also a very smart person. He immediately thought of something and said, Mr. Yun means to first give up the right to negotiate, and when those people can't reach an agreement, this Prime Minister will help to decide the overall situation? Yes. Yun Ke nodded with satisfaction. He praised the other party for being a smart person. Dwayne chuckled after hearing Skylark's praise. But then he frowned and said, But if someone else completes the negotiation with the mercenaries, then wouldn't this Prime Minister have nothing to do with it? Chapter 628. They won't be able to negotiate. The Duke of Loyalty has already sent me a message. Unless the right Prime Minister personally comes, it's useless for anyone to negotiate. Skylark said this with an incomparably confident tone as he smiled and looked at Dunn, who was sitting opposite him. Oh, haha, then I thank the Duke of Loyalty for your praise. Come, let me propose a toast to Mr. Yin. I wish us a happy cooperation. Dunn laughed as his worries were swept away. However, he did not know that the reason Yang said so much to him and the reason why Yang Chendong wanted him to negotiate was because he wanted more benefits. As for what benefits he could get, he would know in the next few days. Dunn left Yang's courtyard with satisfaction and went back to his room to sleep. When he opened his eyes again, the sky was already bright. While he was having breakfast, the butler suddenly came to report that the scouts he had sent to Ava and Siam had returned. They were now part of the royal palace. At the same time, they brought with them a huge piece of news, which was that the armies of the two countries had been defeated. They were mercilessly blocked outside the gates of Laos by the mercenaries, unable to enter at all. In other words, the information provided by Yunk was extremely accurate. This time, Dunn had made the right bet. Ha ha! Listening to the information provided by the butler, Dwayne grinned widely. Everything was as Skylark had said. Now, he needed to rest according to the plan. Thus, he told the housekeeper, spread the news outside. Say that this Prime Minister has fallen ill due to mental exhaustion. It's not convenient for him to see any guests. The butler was puzzled. This time his master had won. Shouldn't it be time for him to shine in the court? Why did he have to stay at home and not come out? However, he was only a butler and could not understand his master's thoughts. After seeing the stern look in Dunn's eyes, he immediately agreed and left to spread the news. At this time, the palace was already in a mess. The scouts had just returned and brought news from the front lines. The Ava and Siam armies' plan to surround Wei to rescue Zhao and attack Laos while it was empty had failed. Not only that, but the Siamese army had also suffered heavy losses. They had lost 3 rounds in a row, and their rations had been destroyed. As soon as Boromir heard the news, he knew that things were going south. Fortunately, he didn't send any reinforcements to the front lines, which meant that he didn't reveal his intention to fight to the death with the mercenaries. As such, there was still a chance for both sides to negotiate. Left Prime Minister Ding Ding Wei stood there with his head lowered. There were many other officials standing in the hall. However, they all seemed to intentionally or unintentionally maintain a certain distance from him. It could be seen that this time he had miscalculated and lost to Right Minister Duin. According to the previous agreement, he would have to give up the position of Prime Minister and retire. If that was the case, who would put a person without power and influence in their eyes? It was only to talk about respect. As if sensing the questioning gazes of the crowd, Ding Ding Wei clenched his teeth. He suddenly cupped his fists and bowed to Boromir. "Your Majesty, this subject has lost. This subject will immediately resign as the left prime minister. One day later, this subject will pack up and leave the capital." "What are you doing? Did this king allow you to leave?" "It was just a joke. How can you take it seriously?" "I don't think the right prime minister will take it seriously." "All right, why isn't the right prime minister here?" Boromir was having a headache over the current situation, and Ding Ding Wei's resignation came. In such a chaotic situation, how could he agree to it? Since Boromir was the one who said that, even if Dwayne was here, he wouldn't be able to say anything, let alone when he wasn't here. When Boromir asked this question, everyone noticed that the right prime minister wasn't in the hall. Many of the officials started whispering to each other. Some of them even thought that the right prime minister was using this opportunity to raise his own status. "Just wait. He will definitely appear in a moment, and then he will stand here with the attitude of a victor and judge the world." More than one person had the same thought. Just as they thought that Dwayne was going to make a grand entrance, a eunuch quietly walked up to Boromir and whispered something into his ear. "Oh, is there such a thing? Is the right prime minister really ill?" Boromir turned his head after hearing the eunuch's words and asked with a look of surprise. When he received the news from the scouts, he wanted to give Du-In some praise or even substantial benefits. After all, this time, Du-In didn't immediately send reinforcements. This was equivalent to creating a buffer zone with the mercenaries. It was equivalent to saving the Golden Border dynasty and not pushing them into a hopeless situation. But he didn't expect that at such a critical time, Du-In would fall ill. This was too much of a coincidence. At least, he didn't believe it. The eunuch we sent to bring him into the palace replied that the right prime minister's face was ugly. His whole body was trembling, and he was lying in bed. It seems that he is really ill. But in order to find out the truth, we have sent the imperial physician to the right prime minister's residence. I think there will be news soon. The old eunuch replied respectfully. "Good. Inform this king as soon as there is news." Boromir nodded. This time, whether Du-In was really ill or not, he wouldn't punish him. It was understandable. After all, wasn't it human nature for people to vent their grievances after being wronged? But this time, Boromir still underestimated Du-In's determination. This was a person who could be ruthless to his enemies, but even more ruthless to himself. In order to make it seem like he was really sick, he actually asked the housekeeper to get some ice from the cellar. Then, he turned it into ice water and poured it on his body. In this way, he really caught a cold. His whole body was cold, and he fell ill. The scout's return had confirmed that what Yunk said was true. Since that was the case, what harm was there in trusting him again? He just hoped that the next development would be as Yunk said. Otherwise, it would be a waste to get sick this time. The imperial physician came and found that Du-In had indeed caught a cold. The imperial physician immediately prescribed medicine and then returned to the palace to report. "What? He is really ill?" After the old eunuch said the news, King Boromir was shocked. It seemed that the right prime minister was really under a lot of pressure this time. Of course, this was just a passing thought. After ordering the old eunuch to send the imperial physician to see the right prime minister, he put his thoughts on the court. He didn't make a decision just now because he had been waiting for the right prime minister to come. Since he couldn't come, the matter of the peace talks could only be handed over to someone else. Although it was someone else, there weren't many people who could really choose. How powerful was the mercenary army? The position of the person sent to negotiate was too low. How could he talk to them on equal terms? Wouldn't it be shameful if the person sent couldn't even see the face of the king? After thinking about it, Boromir still chose the left prime minister, Ding Ding Wei. The left prime minister also wanted to use this opportunity to repay the king's kindness. Of course, he didn't hesitate to agree. After only 2 hours, Ding Ding Wei, who had made some preparations, left Golden Rim City and went straight to Suing City. The reason why he was in such a hurry was naturally because he knew that speed was the most important thing in war. Now that the two allies had lost the war, if the Golden Rim dynasty didn't make a move, who knew if the other side would gather all the troops to attack the Golden Rim dynasty in anger? Once they made this decision, it would be even more difficult to negotiate with them. The carriage sped along the way. Who knew how many horses were changed on the road? Normally, It would take 5 or 6 days to reach Suing City, but Ding Ding Wei only took 3 days. As soon as he arrived, he sent people to the mercenary camp outside the city to express the Golden Rim dynasty's intention to negotiate and stop the war. At this moment, Suing City was already full of holes. These days, the mercenary army's cannons didn't stop firing. It was unknown when a powerful shell would fall, and every time it fell, it would cause a lot of damage in the city. It was normal for people to die and houses to be destroyed. For this reason, most of the people in the city had been evacuated, leaving only the soldiers. They didn't dare to leave without orders. They were on tenterhooks every day, fearing that the next shell would fall on their heads. General De and personally came out to meet Ding Ding Wei. As soon as they met, the general began to complain. He also said that he had made countless requests to the king's city, either to send reinforcements or to prepare for peace talks. Why didn't their response until now, etc.? Facing De Un's aggrieved face, Ding Ding Wei asked with a displeased face, "You generals are always thinking of asking His Majesty for help when something happens. Why didn't you try to fight the mercenaries? If you could win, would you still need to suffer these grievances?" "Hey, Left Prime Minister, it's easy for you to say that." Hearing this, De Un was a little angry. He was the general of a dynasty and belonged to the existence of the military leader. There was no need to talk about his authority. Although Ding Ding Wei was the left prime minister, in reality, he wasn't much stronger than him. Not to mention, it was now a time of war, and the status of soldiers was greatly increased. How could he be afraid of the other party? "Left Prime Minister, how could you not know that we didn't try to launch a counterattack? But the mercenaries have continuous fire guns that can take people's lives from hundreds of feet away. Our bows and arrows only have a range of 300 feet. How can we fight them? This general has ordered 2 attacks, but we didn't even see a single person and suffered heavy casualties. How can we fight such a battle? Left Prime Minister, please teach me." Of course, if Left Prime Minister is willing to personally lead the army, then I will give you a good set of armor. How about it? Asking a civil official to go to the battlefield to fight was clearly nonsense. How could Ding Ding Wei answer? He coldly snorted and said, "Fine, since the army can't win, then let us civil officials negotiate with our mouths." Chapter 629. All right, Doan nodded, as if this was how it should be. This scene infuriated Ding Ding Wei greatly. In the past, when there was a war, it was always the generals who were in charge of the war, and the civil officials who were in charge of the peace. But now, as soon as Dagon heard that they were going to negotiate, he agreed without hesitation. From this, it could be seen that they were really outnumbered by the mercenaries. If that was the case, wouldn't it mean that this time's negotiation wouldn't go smoothly? Now, he just hoped that the other party would not ask for too much. Ding Ding Wei was destined to be disappointed. Although the mercenaries quickly gave an answer and welcomed them to the peace talks, when Ding Ding Wei went to the mercenary camp the next day, he didn't see the famous Duke of Loyalty from the Great Ming Dynasty, but only 2 regimental political commissars. He knew that the peace talks this time wouldn't go so smoothly. He couldn't even see the main characters, which was a bad sign. The people who met Ding Ding Wei were the political commissar of the 2nd Regiment, Kong Jie, and the political commissar of the 3rd Regiment, Chen Bo. This was also Yang Qindong's intention, to train these people's political skills. Of course, the 2 of them were prepared when they came. That was, Chen Bo would play the good cop, and Kong Jie would play the bad cop. When the red and white figures first met with Ding Ding Wei, they opened their mouths wide and proposed conditions that Ding Ding Wei could not accept. According to the 2 political commissars, the war could be stopped, but the Phnom Penh dynasty had to submit to the Duke of Loyalty. At the same time, the entire Phnom Penh dynasty had to be divided into provinces like Vietnam and Laos. King Boromir had to leave the palace and be taken to a mysterious place, according to the mercenaries. He would be put under house arrest for the rest of his life. The other ministers would have to hand over half of their property to protect themselves, and so on. These were completely overbearing terms. One could imagine how dark Ding Ding Wei's face would be when he heard this. Then, He laughed out of anger. What's the difference between your demands and occupying the Phnom Penh dynasty by force? Of course there is. If we were to attack, a minister like you wouldn't be able to save your life just by handing over half of your wealth. Chen Bo, who was in charge of playing the bad guy, said without hesitation, Are you so confident that you can take down our gilded border dynasty? Don't you know that even a rabbit will bite when it's cornered? When we are both injured, Siam and Awa will join forces to attack. I'm afraid you will have to pay a heavy price. Ding Ding Wei said in a threatening tone. He didn't believe that the mercenaries would be so bold as to not care about other countries. If that was the case, they wouldn't have just surrounded Suwung City. They would have directly attacked it. At this point, Chimbo suddenly thought of something and said, "Oh right, the reason why you came here must be because you heard the news that we defeated the Siamese and Ava army. Yes, if you were willing to negotiate before this, we would still be able to do so. But now, either you surrender or wait for my mercenaries to blast your heart with their guns." Is this the opinion of the loyal Duke? After feeling Chun Bo's tough attitude, Ding Dingwei knew that there would be no result if he continued to talk to this person, so he wanted to see the higher-ups. Perhaps it was easy to meet the King of Hell, but difficult to deal with the little demons. This is not the opinion of the loyal Duke, but the opinion of most of our military generals. Chimbo turned his head and said with a very arrogant look. Just like that, the first meeting ended without any results. Just as Ding Dingwei returned to Suwung City with a belly full of anger, a few cannonballs suddenly flew over his head. One of them even landed not far from his team. He didn't know if it was a random shot or if it was done on purpose to give him a show of strength. The bombardment continued. There was no fixed time, no fixed location, and no fixed number of shells. It seemed that everything depended on the mood of the mercenaries. When he was in a good mood, he would only fire once every half a day. When he was in a bad mood, he would fire a few times, causing the people in the city to panic. Even the morale in the barracks was declining day by day. If General Dagan had not sent an inspection team to keep watch at the rear, there would have been many deserters. The atmosphere in the city became more and more serious, and the pressure on Ding Ding Wei also increased. He went to the mercenary camp for 3 days in a row. One of the negotiators, Chun Bo, didn't treat him well. Although there was another negotiator, Kong Jia, who constantly adjusted the atmosphere in the middle, the negotiations didn't break down. The content didn't change much. Ding Ding Wei had no choice but to write the situation in a memorial and send it back to the capital, Phnom Penh City. When the news reached the capital, King Boromir couldn't sit still. If the mercenaries were determined to take down Phnom Penh like how they took down Jiaoji and Lansong, then what could they use to stop them? Yes, they still had an army of more than 300,000 soldiers. If they fought, they would be able to cause a certain amount of damage to the mercenaries or even severely injure them. This gave the two allied countries a chance to fight back. But in this way, Phnom Penh was destined to be turned into a sieve or even destroyed. In this case, what benefits did it have to do with them? What should they do? Boromir, who was cursing Siam and Awa in his heart, could only think of a solution. Fortunately, there was good news at this time. The old eunuch beside him said that the right Prime Minister, Dun, had recovered. Although he wasn't as healthy as before, as long as he didn't do strenuous exercise, he wouldn't have any problems doing ordinary work. Quick, summon the right Prime Minister. When he heard the news, Boromir was like a person walking in the darkness who saw the light of dawn, and he shouted excitedly. Dun's illness was indeed cured. It was originally a self-inflicted cold. Because it was treated in time, it looked more serious 2 days ago. Now, he had been recuperating for more than a week. Naturally, he was fine. Of course, Dun was able to recover so quickly thanks to Yun Kei's help. Mr. Yun said that it was time for him to come back, and it was also time for him to make a contribution. With the left Prime Minister, Ding Ding Wei, it would be very advantageous for Dun to take over the negotiations, especially in terms of conditions. The facts had proven that Yun Kei's words could be trusted. Of course, Dun had to stand up. At this time, he could be said to be in high spirits. Even when he followed the eunuch into the palace, he was still arrogant and confident. As Yin Kei said, the left prime minister hit a wall in the front line. The king didn't really want to fight with the mercenaries, and the negotiation force would become the mainstream. Naturally, it was time for him to perform, because Yin Kei said that in the entire Golden Border dynasty, only he could handle the negotiation. Of course, in return, this time, he had to fight for a certain amount of rights for the mercenaries. For this reason, Dun basically agreed without hesitation. Perhaps others would think that he was betraying his country's rights, but only he knew that if he didn't, there would be someone else to take over this position. Not to mention, if he could protect the Golden Border dynasty at this time, it would be a great achievement. Not to mention, he could also attack the left prime minister, Ding Ding Wei. This had always been his wish. Since he could make his majesty happy, make the mercenaries happy, and make himself happy, why not do such a thing? Dun walked into the side hall and saw King Boromir sitting high above. He saw that the king's eyes lit up, and then his face was full of smiles. Ah, the right prime minister is here. This king's heart is at ease. Come, give the prime minister a seat. Giving a seat was a very high courtesy, and something like this had never happened before. Just this action alone could prove a lot of things. At this time, Dun's heart was at ease. After more than 2 hours, Dun walked out of the palace with a satisfied face. Boromir had approved that he would replace the left prime minister, Ding Ding Wei, to negotiate with the mercenaries in Suwong. Not only that, the king even told Dun the bottom line. As long as he followed the bottom line, he would have more freedom to play. Chapter 630. The above was the general content of the negotiation. Although there were some other details, they were all carried out around these for major points. The agreement was reached 3 days after Right Ding Dun arrived at Su Wong Chung. When the news was sent back to Phnom Penh City, King Boromir heaved a sigh of relief. Although they suffered a lot of losses, they managed to stop the mercenary army. In a way, this was the first time a country or region managed to stop the mercenary army. Boromir was very proud of this. Of course, because of Boromir's compromise, it attracted the dissatisfaction of Siam and Ava. But in this regard, Phnom Penh dynasty did not say anything. Who asked these two countries to withdraw their troops so early? They even wanted to laugh at Phnom Penh dynasty. After this incident, Phnom Penh dynasty also saw their own shortcomings. No matter who had it, it was better to have it themselves. No matter who was strong, they were not as strong as themselves. They decided to put all their efforts into developing their military. Recruiting, training, and training soldiers had become something they urgently needed to do. Previously, because they had compensated the mercenaries, now they needed more money to train their soldiers. All of a sudden, all kinds of taxes began to increase, and some even doubled. In some places, the taxes were collected 3 years later or even 5 years later. Because of this, the people were complaining, and the order of the country began to fall into chaos. The matter of Phnom Penh dynasty was finally resolved temporarily. The mercenary army also began to withdraw. When the news was sent back to Vientiane City, the capital of Laos, many people were shocked. In the eyes of the nobles, this time the mercenary army and the Phnom Penh army would definitely suffer losses. In this way, their opportunity had appeared. When the time came, once Siam and Ava sent troops again, Laos would definitely not want to be trapped internally and externally. Their status would rise, and their authority would increase. Wouldn't this bring them benefits? But now, the mercenary army had stopped. Were they still the powerful mercenary army that destroyed a country? If this was the case, where would their development opportunity lie? More importantly, this time, the mercenaries had stood up for the Solingans. Naturally, they would receive the support of the domestic business groups. Their position would be more stable. Would they have a chance to rise again? In the eyes of the merchants and commoners, the conclusion that they came to was completely different from the nobles. The mercenaries had won the battle, and for the first time, the enemy general had apologized to the merchants on their side. This was something that seemed impossible to happen. Didn't this mean that the mercenaries' position had been recognized and respected by everyone? As the governor of Lao province, Luan Shaochun had said that as long as you became a legal citizen of Lao province, no matter where you were, no matter what happened, as long as you encountered any difficulties or injustice, the provincial government would stand up for you, solving the difficulties and finding justice at the same time. Naturally, many people scoffed at this. Most of them were merchants. They were not as ignorant as ordinary people. They had traveled extensively for many years and had been to countless places. Naturally, their horizons were not something that ordinary people could compare to. It was precisely because they had seen too many things that they did not believe that anyone could make decisions for them. Although they were very rich, their social status was not high. In the eyes of others, they were full of the stench of money. When it came to the degree of real respect, they were often inferior to some ordinary people. Soldiers, farmers, workers, and merchants. Merchants were ranked last. The general trend was like this. Why should they believe that the Lao provincial government would really protect their rights, although they had paid a lot of business taxes? Now, no one dared to say such a thing. What happened to the Solingans had proven everything. Not only did General Hun's son of the Phnom Penh dynasty personally apologize and pay compensation, but he also invited the Solingans to do business in the Phnom Penh dynasty. They bowed their heads, paid compensation, and even took the initiative to invite them. Did this not prove the status of merchants? As the patriarch of the Solingans, Nong Si was very proud of himself. He was actively preparing goods to go to the Phnom Penh dynasty in person. After all, with the mercenaries as their backing, it could be imagined that the Phnom Penh dynasty would never dare to play any tricks. Did they really want to fight another war and pay compensation again? Sual Langan was not the only merchant family in Laos. There were many other businesses that were not weaker than them, and so were even stronger than them. They all saw the opportunity and began to contact Governor Luan, creating all kinds of opportunities to get along and meet. Some of the big families even found the youngest and most beautiful girls in their families and gave them to Luan Shaochun as concubines in order to strengthen the relationship between the two sides. After Yang Chendong heard about this matter, he even gave instructions that if Luan Shaochun was willing, he could marry a few high-quality foreign women as concubines. Because he did not forget the expectations Luan Shaoqi and Zhou Hua had for this son when he left Crimson City. One of the most important things was the important matter of marrying a wife and having children. Even Luan Xiaoyu had mentioned it twice in front of him for the first time, showing the importance Luan family placed on this matter. Of course, according to Yang Chendong's intentions, he could take a woman from another race as a concubine, but it was impossible for him to take her as a wife. It had to be a Han woman in order to ensure the purity of his bloodline. He did not want the country that his generation had worked so hard to build to be swallowed up by their children with foreign bloodline. In fact, not only did Yang Chendong have such requirements for Luan Shaochun, but also for all the senior cadres and senior officers. When you reach a certain age, you can marry a high-quality woman from outside the clan as your concubine, but you absolutely cannot let her become your wife. If anyone dares to do so and is found out, then I'm sorry, but everything you have now will become zero. You will also be removed from the cadre and become an ordinary citizen, vanishing into the crowd. Since Yang Chendong had spoken, the business groups paid more attention to this matter. Luan Shaochun also had an extra job, which was to go back and forth between the various big families after work. It was to get closer to them and, at the same time, to arrange blind dates. Not to mention, there was really a lucky woman that he took a fancy to and married as a concubine. With the previous example, the other merchant families were even more enthusiastic about this matter. Invitations for Luan Shaochun to attend banquets were placed all over the office desk. The reason why the merchants were so crazy was naturally because of the benefits. Compared to the ordinary people, their gratitude was much purer. This was especially so when Yang Bao published a series of punishments for this matter, using the World Knowledge Tea House to make it known to everyone. Regardless of whether it was the elderly of 70 years old or the children of 3 years old, they all knew about this matter. They knew that as citizens of Lao province, they had more security when they went out, and they could receive the respect of others from the bottom of their hearts. This was something that they did not even dare to think about before. Lao province had led them to do it. In order to express their gratitude, the ordinary people could only lower their heads and work hard. Those of suitable age naturally chose to join the military to ensure that the fruits of their labor would not be stolen by others. They were just this kind of people. If someone treated them well, they would treat that person well. This was the will of the people. After this matter, the hearts of the people started to submit. After Yuan Shaochun gave out the various government orders, they were always quickly implemented, and Lao province entered a period of rapid development. When Yang Chendong brought the main force of the mercenaries back to Wanxiang City, he saw this scene of prosperity, which made him very happy. In order to create enough space and environment for Lao province and Vietnam province to develop, he also sent messengers to Siam and Ava to discuss cooperation. There were no eternal enemies, only eternal benefits. Business alliances could strengthen each other. Since this was the case, why did they have to fight? Even the powerful mercenaries were willing to put down their weapons. They naturally went with the flow and agreed to a temporary peace. However, everyone knew that there would be a war between them sooner or later. Now was the time to develop and strengthen themselves. After dealing with the external threats, there was no problem with the internal integration. At this time, Yang Shandong was also about to leave Lao province. The Security Bureau was now sending a telegram every day reporting the situation between Northern Ming and Walla. There had already begun a small-scale skirmish between the armies. If it continued to develop like this and there was no one to control it, it was likely that the war would be unstoppable. Since this was the case, Yang Shandong would definitely want to take a share of the profits. In addition, because their foundation was not strong enough, Lao province could not meet the requirements for expansion in a short period of time. There was no point in staying here, so his departure was inevitable. Yang Qindong decided to leave. The first to leave was the main force led by Commander Lung Song. Chichen City could not be without a strong military force, so someone had to go back and defend it. After they left, the sixth young master also decided on the people he would bring with him when he left. It was Lung Feng Wusheng's 3rd Regiment, as well as 6 auxiliary battalions who had experienced hundreds of battles and already possessed decent battle strength. As long as they were trained a little more, they would definitely become the Lung Feng in the future. The ones left behind were Luo Po's 2nd Regiment, which was responsible for the security of Lao Province and Vietnam. Yang Qindong had basically agreed to expand Luo Po's 2nd Regiment into the 2nd Division of the Lung Feng. The selection and assessment of personnel had to be carried out in Chichen City. He could not be careless about the background check. The Lung Feng was his most elite force, so there would definitely be a situation that he could not control. If that was the case, he would rather not expand. Chapter 631. Luopa naturally agreed with this point. He fully supported the 6th young master's suggestion and expressed that there was no need to rush the expansion. He would do it steadily and make sure that every cold front that came would be a cold front. The strength of the elites would not decrease, but would only increase. Yang Shandong was not worried about Luo Pa. This person was able to stand out from the other officers and become the next regiment commander after Lung Song. Now that he had the qualifications, no one would say anything about him becoming the 2nd Division commander. After arranging this matter, it was time to leave. Before leaving, Yang Shandong had a long talk with Luan Shaochen. He put forward some very useful suggestions for the future development of Laos. After that, he waved his hand and left Vientiane with nearly 4,000 mercenaries. He went to Yunnan province by land and met with Song Zhe, the governor of Yunnan province. After giving Song Zhe his approval and support, he boarded the ship at the harbor outside Tsiui City in Yunnan province and headed north along the sea. After nearly a year, Yang Qindong finally returned to the north of Great Ming Dynasty after stirring up trouble in the south. Overall, this trip to the south had been very fruitful. Invited by the Southern Ming Dynasty, he first quelled the rebellion of the Yellow Bandits, then destroyed Jiaoji and Lancang, and established two provinces, Vietnam and Laos. He dealt a big blow to the Phnom Penh Dynasty, flexed his muscles, and obtained a period of peace. Finally, he was going to return to the north. Standing on the deck of the naval warship, Yang Qindong looked ahead and planned every step in his heart. This time, he did not intend to enter Baiming's capital, Beiping City, when he returned to the north. His current identity was a little too sensitive. If he were to return now, it was very likely that it would cause unrest in the imperial court of the Northern Ming Dynasty. It was even possible that they would develop a strong sense of fear and give up on the battle with Walla. This was not the result he wanted. When he went to the south before, it was because he could not see any hope of expansion in the north. But even if the south was temporarily unable to expand, how could he possibly step in to stop a war that was about to break out in the north? The more intense the fight, the more he could fish in troubled waters and unknowingly develop and strengthen himself. Besides, the environment in the north this time was much better than the one in the south. When he went to the south, he was really in the dark and had to take things one step at a time. But now that he was in the north, he at least had a certain foundation. For example, the company commander of the Wind Chaser cavalry that he had sent to the grasslands 2 years ago had grown to a certain scale after a period of growth. Even in Baiming's neuter Gandusi region, he had become a top figure. This time, Yang Qindong wanted to meet up with Wind Chaser. Presumably, with his support and participation, Wind Chaser's team would expand in a very short period of time and become a powerful force to enter the northern grasslands. The military ship headed north. The speed of the ship, which had been converted to steam power, was much faster. In just 5 days, they had traveled thousands of kilometers through the Korean Strait and arrived at a place called Haisheng. Haisheng was Vladivostok, which was occupied by Russia in the future. To the north was the Shuangqing Guards, and to the south was the Maoyan Guards. It belonged to the Great Ming's newer Gandusi. The neuter Gandusi was a local military organization set up by the Great Ming government in Heilongjiang, Asu River, today's Wasuli River, Songhua River, and Nayan River, today's Nen River. During Hongwu's reign, most of the Yuan dynasty officials in the newer Gandusi region surrendered to the Ming government. In the 9th year of Yongle, 1411, the newer Gandusi was officially set up. It was the highest administrative organization in Heilongjiang and Wasuli River. The main officials of the Gandusi were transferred officials and later became hereditary officials. The Mongols, Jurchens, Jalimi, Qi, Dor, and other races all made a living by hunting and fishing. The Ming dynasty government also appointed the leaders of the various races to take charge of the various places and gave them seals. They followed their customs and gave them tributes from time to time. The tributes included gerfalcon, mink fur, horses, and other local products, which was similar to the inland taxes. The newer Gandusi was set up in newer Gandusi on the east bank of the Heilongjiang River. It was roughly 200 kilometers away from the Heilongjiang mouth. The officials and troops that were sent to the newer Gandusi were all here. There were over 400 guards and troops stationed there. The area was east of the sea. Northeast included Sakhalin Island, west of the Wonan River, Enan River, south of the Tumun River, and north of the Xing Mountains. It could be said that this was a place where good and bad mixed together. Because of the diversity of the ethnic groups, it was very difficult to manage this place. There were even some areas that were constantly in war. Various ethnic groups, and even some ambitious people wanted to expand their own forces here. In such a natural environment, Zhu Feng continued to develop and grow. When he first came here under Yang Qindong's orders, he was only a squad leader. Including himself, he only had 10 brothers. After such a long time, his team continued to grow, and now it had the scale of a regiment, with 3 battalions and a regiment under its command. Zhu Feng had also been given the position of regiment commander. You became a regiment commander just like that? I hope you won't disappoint me." With a smile on his face, Yang Qindong thought of the matter mentioned in the Security Bureau report. The warship docked at the sea town. Before it reached the shore, it could see a black mass of cavalry approaching. From afar, there were at least 1,000 people. "Prepare for battle." The third leader, Wu Sheng, shouted out reflexively. The 500 to 600 Lung Feng members and the guards on the ship quickly took out their guns and looked for a suitable position, adjusting the angle of the muzzle. "It's fine." Yang Qindong was very satisfied with the performance of the Lung Feng. Then, he waved his hand nonchalantly and looked ahead. "This shouldn't be an enemy." As if to prove this statement, as soon as the voice fell, a large 5-starred red flag appeared in the middle of the cavalry. Naturally, the cold vanguard soldiers were no stranger to this flag. When they were on the sea with the Navy, they often used this flag. "Third Regiment Commander, take a company of soldiers and check it out. Be careful." After Wu Sheng saw the red flag, he put away his gun, but his eyes were still cautious. Who knows if the enemy stole a 5-starred red flag to confuse him. After the 3rd Regiment Commander, Chang Chunyang, received the order, he took a company of Lung Feng to the shore and approached the cavalry. Through the binoculars, he saw that they said something, and then a small group of cavalry followed behind Chang Chunyang and approached the shore. Ha! With the existence of that qi in his heart, Yang Qindong's eyesight had reached an unimaginable level. When he was still 100 meters away, he laughed heartily. He had already recognized that the leader of the cavalry was Zhue Feng. It was indeed Zhue Feng's cavalry regiment. He came to Seatown first after receiving the information from the Security Bureau. Not only that, but he also made the decision to ask the people here to leave. He even sent a military officer to patrol the surrounding 20 miles. In his opinion, the 6th young master's arrival should be a secret. He probably didn't want more people to know about it. So naturally, this matter couldn't be leaked. After asking the people nearby to leave, Zhue Feng began to wait for the 6th young master to appear. In his heart, the 6th young master was his life's benefactor. In the past, he didn't have enough to eat or wear. He didn't even know where he would live the next day, whether he could still fill his stomach or whether he could still persevere and survive. But after meeting Yang Qindong, everything changed. Not only did he not have to worry about eating and wearing clothes, he also learned how to read and read. He knew that people didn't only live to fill their stomachs, but also to have more pursuits. Ever since he was born, he had been raising horses for those old masters. Zhue Feng's greatest pursuit in life was to have his own home one day, to be able to shelter him from the wind and rain, to have his own wife and children, to complete the family line, and to have a horse that belonged to him. It didn't have to be tall and handsome, but he would definitely take good care of it. Every day, he would use water to wash the horse very clean. Occasionally, when he had nothing to do, he could ride the horse for a walk. That was already very happy. But these thoughts could only be wishes, and he could only think about them in his heart. If he didn't even have enough to eat, how could he talk about raising his wife and children? And all of this changed because of Yang Qindong. All of his wishes were quickly realized. Following this, Zhue Feng's life ideals also changed. It turned out that he could also create some achievements. Not only did he bring glory to his ancestors, he didn't even know who his parents were. But at least he could let his children have a better life in the future and not have to worry about food and clothing. Under Yang Qindong's guidance, he was fortunate enough to become Zhue Feng of the Cold Front, and his life changed. Because he knew horses and was good at training them, and his military skills were good, he finally became the squad leader of the Cold Front. He was sent to the north, where most of the terrain was plains. This completely changed his life and gave him the space to display his talents. Today, he was no longer a youth who had to worry about his stuttering. He was already the commander of an army that commanded more than 1,000 people. But no matter what his identity had changed, when he knew that the 6th young master was coming, he was still very excited. At this moment, he followed behind the Spring Sun Camp commander, and his heart beat a lot faster. He didn't even know what to say when he saw the 6th young master. Before the situation became clear, the warship only threw down a plank to disembark and didn't completely reach the shore. Zhui Feng walked up the plank to the deck of the warship and stood in front of Yang Chendong. "Greetings, sixth young master." Almost instinctively, Zhui Feng stood at attention and saluted, showing a sense of competence. Chapter 632. HM not bad. It's a bit darker, but it looks more sturdy. Raising his right hand, Yang Chendong smashed Zhui Feng's right chest. This had become Yang Chendong's signature move. Even though everyone who was hit would feel a burning pain in their chest, no one complained about it, because they knew that this was the sixth young master's way of showing intimacy with them. What? Other people didn't even have the right to be hit like this. Zhui Feng, who was praised, chuckled and revealed a silly smile. Then he thought of something and turned around to introduce the people behind him. "Sixth young master, this is 1st Battalion Commander Deng Yu, 2nd Battalion Commander Gao Danhua, and 3rd Battalion Commander Ma Xiangshan." Deng Yu and Gao Danhua were originally soldiers of Cold Front. The sixth young master definitely has an impression of them. It's just that this Ma Xiangshan joined later. However, this person's horsemanship is extremely good and his riding skills are also very good. He is also very good at commanding troops in battle, so he was promoted to the position of 3rd Battalion Commander. Of course, the appointment of the 3 battalion commanders still needs to be approved by the 6th young master, the military, and the political department. Zhui Feng had indeed been trained. At least he knew that there were things that he couldn't decide. He needed to request approval from his superiors. "HM not bad. Deng Yu and Gao Danhua, your performance was also very good. As for your appointment, I can give you an answer now. It's approved." Yang Chendong had a smile on his face. These 3 people were the first 10 people to be sent here. Their backgrounds had already been investigated when they were in Crimson City. There would not be any problems, so he could directly appoint them. As for this Ma Xiangshan, he didn't know him, so he still had to follow the procedures. He couldn't casually make an exception. Deng Yu and Gao Danhua, who were called out, were naturally excited. This was an appointment approved by the 6th young master. Their identities and positions were stable. Ma Xiangshan, who wasn't called out, had an ugly expression. Then he made a shocking move. "Sixth young master, I want to challenge you to a duel on horseback. Do you dare?" The words were shouted by Ma Xiangshan. Perhaps it was because he felt wronged and wanted a vent. However, he pointed the spearhead at Yang Chendong, which was something that no one could tolerate. "How dare you? Kneel and accept your fate. Take him down." More than one person shouted. Then, one person after another jumped out. Among them were the officers of the 3rd Regiment of the 1st Division, as well as the captains and members of the 1st and 2nd Guard squads. Even Hu Meng couldn't help but shout at this moment. Then, he wanted to take down this arrogant person. But before he could make a move, Beta Persei had already taken a step forward and threw a punch forward. Beta Persei was the eldest of the 5 Yang family members, and his position and power were second only to Tiger's Man. His mission was to ensure the absolute safety of the 6th young master. Now that someone dared to speak rudely in front of him, he wouldn't be polite and threw a punch forward. The punch was so fast that many people didn't see what happened. The punch had already broken through the air and arrived in front of Ma Xiangshan. Unlike the others, when Ma Xiangshan shouted that sentence, he thought of all kinds of possibilities, so he was prepared. Because of this, when Beta Persei's punch came, he quickly dodged to the side. Then, with his agility, he really dodged the punch. Beta Persei wasn't surprised that his punch missed. If a person who dared to shout in front of the young master didn't have any strength, he would look down on him. But it didn't matter that he dodged the punch. He suddenly swung his right arm to the right, and the punch turned into a swing punch. The momentum was so fast and fierce that even Ma Xiangshan didn't expect it. Bang! After the punch, Ma Xiangshan flew out and flew to the deck 3 meters away. He fell to the ground with a bang. Just from the way he landed on the ground, one could tell how powerful that punch was. "Take him down," Tiger's Mane quickly responded. With the order, a team of guards, Ba Daojiang and Peng Yu, grabbed Ma Xiangshan, who fell to the ground, and then stood him up. They looked at him with a murderous look. It seemed that as long as the sixth young master gave the order, the two of them would chop him up and throw him into the sea to feed the fish. Ma Xiangshan, who was restrained, first took a deep breath. After feeling the pain in his chest and not leaving any internal injuries, his eyes fell on Yang Chendong. He then said with a provocative look, "What? You don't dare? You really don't know how to write the word death." Tiger's Mane saw Ma Xiangshan provoking the young master again and again. He was already furious and threw a punch at Ma Xiangshan's lower abdomen. Bang! Ba Daojiang and Peng Yu held Ma Xiangshan tightly. The punch was solid. Ma Xiangshan's body shrank into a ball. He opened his mouth and breathed heavily. Obviously, the punch was so heavy that he couldn't speak. Windchaser, Deng Yu, and Gao Danhua, who were standing opposite, were so scared that they couldn't speak. Usually, Ma Xiangshan was very low-key and didn't talk much. He was very calm. How could he become so easily angered at this moment? He actually challenged the authority of the sixth young master again and again. Did he really want to die? Among the three, Windchaser was the most difficult. He naturally respected the sixth young master, but at the same time, he also appreciated Ma Xiangshan. He was a native here. Not only was he familiar with the terrain and environment, but he also had Zhang Yuqi to command the battle. Every time, he would lead the charge. It could be said that he was both a brave and a wise general. Such a person was rare. Even Deng Yu and Gao Danhua couldn't compare to him. And now, this person destroyed his own future just because he challenged the sixth young master. He felt that it was a pity. Of course, he didn't dare to say anything. He was very clear about his identity. He also knew that the authority of the sixth young master wasn't something that others could casually question. No one spoke. On the deck, there was only the sound of Ma Xiangshan constantly retching and Lung Feng glaring at him with murderous gazes. Perhaps in some people's eyes, Ma Xiangshan was already a dead man. They were only waiting for the sixth young master to give the order and hand him over to them. Then they would use all kinds of methods to make this person regret having a tongue and regret being able to speak. "You want to challenge me?" While everyone was waiting, Yang Chendong finally spoke. But it wasn't a condemnation. It was a question. Ma Xiangshan's physique was really good. Even though he was punched 3 times, the pain still persisted. It wouldn't go away for a few days, but he had already recovered his basic ability to speak. With the lesson just now, he didn't dare to challenge Yang Chendong. Fortunately, he had already achieved his goal, so he nodded after hearing this question. "Well, you are very courageous. Since it's like this, I will agree. How about this? Seeing that you're injured, I'll give you 3 days to recuperate. After 3 days, we'll see who's the winner." Yang Chendong nodded lightly and actually agreed to the other party's challenge. This result naturally surprised everyone. Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei bluntly said, "Young master, you have a body of gold. How can you take such a risk?" Yes, sixth young master, Ma Xiangshan must have taken the wrong medicine. Don't take his words to heart. Windchaser and the others also quickly persuaded. "Well, I have made up my mind. It's settled. By the way, in these 3 days, no one is allowed to find trouble with Ma Xiangshan. This young master wants a fair competition. Is that clear?" "Clear," Tiger's Mane and the others said reluctantly. But there was no other way. In their eyes, Yang Chendong's words were an imperial edict. No one dared to disobey. Ma Xiangshan was the first to get off the boat. He really needed to heal. The 3 punches just now were heavier than the previous one. It had seriously affected his movements. When Ma Xiangshan left, Windchaser immediately knelt down and asked for forgiveness. "Sixth young master, it's all my fault for not teaching him well. Please punish me." "That's right. Your soldiers are indeed too arrogant. That's not good. I'll punish you with half a year's salary and find a good horse for this young master." That shouldn't be a problem, right? Yang Chendong naturally didn't like to see subordinates offending their superiors. But Ma Xiangshan's matter was an exception. He had just arrived, and only a few people in this cavalry regiment were familiar with him. The others were probably not familiar with him. If he wanted to lead them, it would be very difficult if he didn't show a certain amount of strength. Since that was the case, he decided to use this opportunity to tell the cavalrymen how powerful the person they were following was. It was only a penalty of half a year's salary. This was nothing to Zhue Feng, who was alone. But he was curious about why the sixth young master was looking for a horse. Puzzled, he asked, "Sixth young master, what do you need a horse for?" "Of course it's for a competition. This young master has already agreed to Ma Xiangshan's request. I can't just stand on the ground and fight with him. Moreover, it's not just me. The other Lung Feng soldiers and auxiliary soldiers also need war horses. Living here, how can one live without a horse?" Yang Qindong spoke as if this was a matter of course. These words not only stunned Winchaser, but also Wu Sheng and the others behind him. "Sixth young master, we don't need it. We have bicycles to ride. Those things are very fast, and we don't need to eat food. Isn't that better?" Wu Sheng had never ridden a horse before. His soldiers also hadn't ridden a horse before. There was some resistance in his heart. "Yes, sixth young master, you can live here without a horse. The various forces here also have infantrymen. This is very normal." Winchaser also explained. There was no other way. He didn't know about this before, so he didn't prepare so many horses. This was a hole for nearly 4,000 war horses. How could it be solved so easily? Chapter 633. Yang Chundong shook his head. "I don't care what the other factions are like. Our cold front will either not do anything or be the strongest. It is a must for everyone to have their own warhorse. In the future, everyone should have at least 2 or more." Yang Qindong did not mention the matter of the bicycle. Although it did not require food, if it was used for a long period of time, it would inevitably have all sorts of problems. They were so far away from Crimson City that if a problem occurred, it would be impossible to fix it. Not to mention, riding a bicycle required a lot of stamina. It was fine to use it for a short period of time, but it was not as convenient as riding a horse. Yang Qindong's words were in order. Since he had made a decision, the others could only follow his orders. Fortunately, although Winchaser didn't have many war horses, he still had some. Coincidentally, there was a wild horse in their stable. No one could tame it. Even Winchaser took a long time to cultivate his feelings for it. Only then could he get close to it without being rejected. However, that horse was really tall and muscular. At a glance, one could tell that it was a fine steed. If it became Yang Qindong's mount, it wouldn't be a loss of face. When Winchaser reported the situation to Yang Qindong, his interest was immediately piqued. "Oh, there's a warhorse like that? Come, let's go take a look." The warship had already reached the shore. The soldiers were all disembarking and unloading the supplies. With everything in order, most of the officers had nothing to do. Everyone followed the sixth young master to the stable. The stable did not have a fixed location. Usually, wherever the main army was, it would be built there. Right now, Winchaser's main forces were all around Sea Town, so the stable was in the middle of the town. After disembarking from the ship, they arrived at the stable after traveling for 4 li. From afar, the pure white wild horse was so eye-catching. Just looking at it from afar, Yang Qindong fell in love with it. In his previous life, Yang Dong was an absolute soldier king. No matter if it was flying, running in the water, or walking on land, there was nothing he could not understand. However, he did not know much about war horses. Other than sometimes riding a horse in the race course to adapt to various roles in order to complete missions, he didn't have much contact with it. But what kind of horse was that? It had been trained and was very docile, unlike the horse in front of him. Before he even got close to him, he saw it constantly snorting as if it was trying to keep people away. At the same time, its 4 hooves were constantly moving, as if it would give a kick to anyone who stepped forward. Good horse. Although he didn't know much about horses, this didn't stop Yang Qindong from liking it. He couldn't help but be eager to try. "Sixth young master, please wait a moment. I'll put the saddle on him." Winchaser sucked in a breath of cold air. He could see the desire to conquer in the sixth young master's eyes. But this horse was really not easy to tame. He had raised the horse since he was young, but after so many days, he could only get close to it. Usually, he had to personally deliver the horse feed for this horse. It didn't care about other people's food. It was very arrogant. Yang Qindong didn't speak. He focused all his attention on the white horse. He began to imagine riding on it and galloping the earth. Windchaser took a saddle from one of his soldiers and began to approach slowly. As he approached, he kept saying, white horse, you must be obedient. Although I know you don't like this thing on your body. Aren't horses born to be ridden by people? Accept your fate. Accept your fate." Just like coaxing a child, Windchaser kept talking while approaching. He was very careful, as if the white horse would go crazy at any time. Tiger's Mane, Wu Sheng, and the others looked at this scene with a smile. They felt very interesting. After all, according to the sixth young master's intention, they would also need to ride horses in the future. There was no harm in understanding it in advance. Pong! Just when everyone's eyes were looking here, an unexpected scene happened. The originally restless white horse suddenly raised its hooves and kicked the approaching Windchaser without warning. Windchaser was too familiar with horses. A moment ago, he felt that the atmosphere was not right. When the horse raised its hooves, he suddenly retreated. Fortunately, the white horse was tied to a wooden stake. The distance it could move was limited, so it was able to avoid the attack. Just when everyone thought that it was a close call and applauded Windchaser's reaction, the scene suddenly changed. They saw that the wooden stake tied to the white horse was constantly moving. After a few moments, it was suddenly pulled up from the ground. Then the white horse neighed and rushed straight to Windchaser, who was closest to it. The horse borrowed the momentum of its hooves. With such a fast speed, everyone could imagine that once Windchaser was hit by the white horse, it would be a disaster. At this moment, even Windchaser himself was shocked. He first threw the saddle in his hand to the ground, then turned around and ran quickly. As a horse breeder, he naturally knew what would happen if the horse was frightened. Windchaser's speed was already very fast, just like his name. However, the white horse's speed was even faster. It fully utilized the strength of its legs, and when its four hooves landed, it covered a distance of several meters. In just a breath, it had already arrived behind Windchaser. Its pair of sturdy front hooves were raised high, and it directly smashed towards Windchaser's back. Once it fell, the 2,000 kilograms would be enough to break Windchaser's back. Even if that person could survive, he would be a cripple and unable to do anything. Pong! Just as everyone was shouting and Tiger Mang was about to pull out his pistol, a figure suddenly dashed past. Then, the white horse that was about to land suddenly stopped in midair. If one looked carefully, they would see that Yang Qindong was holding the rope that was tied to a wooden stake tightly in his hand. Just now, Yang Qindong felt the danger. His body suddenly rushed out and grabbed the rope, forcibly pulling the white horse. With such a pull, Yang Qindong's face couldn't help but turn red. The white horse was in its prime and belonged to the heavy horse breed. With a rough estimate, this horse was at least 2,300–400 kilograms, or even more. How could a person pull such a heavy weight? Feeling that at this moment his hands were about to bleed, Yang Qindong couldn't help sinking his qi into his dantian and mobilizing the qi in his body. Only then did he feel that his arms and body felt better. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Windchaser finally escaped from under the horse. But he was already covered in cold sweat. It was obvious that he was really scared. When he saw the white horse being held back by someone, he was naturally very unhappy. When he turned around and saw that the instigator of all this was Yang Qindong, he could not help but turn around and gallop over. The momentum of this run was as heavy as 10,000 pounds. "Don't shoot." Yang Qindong was looking at the white horse's eyes, but from the corner of his eyes, he noticed that Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, and the guards had all taken out their guns. He quickly shouted, and then his body suddenly rushed to the side, avoiding the white horse's counterattack. The attack didn't succeed, and the white horse seemed to be angered. It continued to rush toward Yang Qindong's position, as if it wouldn't stop until it stepped on this person. With the support of Qi, Yang Chendong was like a monkey, always able to avoid the white horse's attack at the last moment. At times, he would also counterattack, fiercely pulling the reins in his hand, bringing a trace of pressure to the white horse. One person and one horse fought a battle of wits and courage around the stable. Surprisingly, the white horse seemed to be quite intelligent. Sometimes it even knew how to make some fake movements, causing Yang Chendong to make mistakes. There were even a few times when it almost kicked the target because of this. Fortunately, the Qi was indeed strong enough, especially now that he didn't need to use any strength. He only needed to dodge the white horse's attacks. This saved Yang Chendong a lot of energy, and the frequency of his counterattacks also became faster and faster. The sixth young master is so powerful. The scene in front of them had attracted more and more people to come here. When Lung Feng and the auxiliary soldiers saw the battle of wits and courage between the god of war and the white horse, they couldn't help but show a surprised expression. They only knew that the sixth young master's martial arts were very good, and his marksmanship was also very good. But all of this was just hearsay. Now that they finally had the chance to see it with their own eyes, everyone admired him in their hearts. In the blink of an eye, a quarter of an hour had passed. The white horse didn't have any intention of stopping its attack, nor did it show any signs of exhaustion. It was still incomparably brave and continued to attack. Relying on the Qi, Yang Chendong dodged and counterattacked when the horse's hooves hit. He was also very brave and fierce. The man and the horse seemed to have reached a consensus, and that was they must use this opportunity to determine the winner. Using the Qi to resist the power, Yang Chendong could feel that the Qi in his body was constantly surging out of his body. After it filled his entire body, it entered his right arm, causing his body to slowly become stronger at this moment. Although this change wasn't very fast, it went over a long period of time. A quarter of an hour had passed, and the Qi didn't have any intention of stopping. It was constantly strengthening his body. This feeling was very subtle, and it made Yang Chendong feel very comfortable. Even though he could already subdue the white horse, he didn't do so. He wanted to use this opportunity to stimulate his stamina and make his body stronger. Outsiders didn't know what was going on, so naturally, they couldn't understand this. When they saw that Yang Chendong had already fought with the white horse for a quarter of an hour, and that the white horse was covered in sweat with a trace of blood, they couldn't help but worry for the sixth young master. Heavens, why is that horse bleeding red? Is it going to die? A member of the guard team didn't know what was going on and shouted loudly. What do you know? Only a Fergana horse would be completely red and even drip red sweat. Zhou Feng's subordinates who understood horses loudly explained. Chapter 634. Because of this answer, the others also turned their heads and looked at Wind-Chasing Wolf. Obviously, this person's speech on the horse could be called an expert and made people trust him. Feeling everyone's eyes on him, Wind-Chasing Wolf nodded without hesitation. Yes, there is such a saying, but usually it is rare for a healthy horse to be red because of fatigue. As for the blood and sweat, it is only recorded in legends. Unexpectedly, this white horse is not red. It is also a pure Fergana horse. It was no wonder that Wind-Chasing Wolf said this. Although no one stipulated that a Fergana horse must be red, at least the probability was higher. A white horse becoming a Fergana horse was not recorded in the book. Everyone finally knew the reason why the white horse turned red, but because of this, they were worried about the sixth young master. This was not an ordinary horse. If Yang Chendong did not stop him and was still so determined, they were afraid that Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei would have shot again. Time passed by little. After half an hour, Yang Chendong could clearly feel that the Qi in his body had stopped. He reluctantly stopped the movements of his hands. At this time, his physique was more than twice as strong as before. He was full of confidence that if he made a move now, he could already control the white horse. But he did not do so. He also knew that the white horse was very tired after turning red and sweating. He was afraid that it could not exert its original strength. That being the case, it was better to let it have a good rest and fight again tomorrow. He wanted to take the opportunity to see if there would be any benefits. Although it was very incredible to talk about such a strong physique, Yang Qindong even had Dat Song, so there was nothing to be surprised about. Too many illogical things had already happened. Even if that was the case, was there a need for one more or one less? Yang Qindong let go of the reins in his hand. White horse. No, it should be said that the red horse was standing there motionless and gasping for breath. Obviously, the fight just now was very tiring, and it should not have any extra strength now. Men, tie it up and serve it well. Don't neglect it. Yang Qindong exhaled a mouthful of turbid qi and laughed heartily. Immediately, someone came forward to tie up the horse. Wind-chasing wolf also took the opportunity to come over. Sixth young master, this horse is now very tired. It is time to subdue it. Wind-chasing wolf was also worried that Yang Qindong did not know how to subdue a horse, so he spoke out of turn. Wind-chasing wolf general meaning was that now was the best time to subdue the horse. Once the red horse became a white horse and recovered, it would be difficult to do so. Yang Qindong knew that Wind Chaser meant well, but Yang Qindong had his own ideas, so he waved his hand heroically. It's fine. I have to subdue it when it's at its strongest. Only then can it truly submit to me. The sixth young master is mighty. When the others heard Yang Qindong's words, they all showed a look of admiration. This was their sixth young master. If he wanted to deal with someone, he would deal with the strongest. He would never take advantage of others. The news of Yang Qindong fighting the white horse by himself quickly spread. Everyone knew about this matter. For a time, many people felt admiration for the sixth young master. In front of these men who killed people as if they were drinking water, if one wanted them to sincerely submit, prestige and status were not enough. One also needed to have great strength. Obviously, Yang Qindong now had this kind of strength. Of course, it was not all words of admiration. In fact, the sixth young master was also very tired after fighting with the white horse for half an hour. He had to pretend to be magnanimous and decided to fight again tomorrow. This kind of saying was not only said by one person, but it was not a hindrance. Many people would even say that people would get tired. To be able to fight with the white horse for half an hour without losing, and even win, who could do it? These words were all heard by Tiger's Mane at night, and then he told Yang Qindong. In a temporary command tent, Yang Qindong was looking at the sand table and thinking about the next plan. Every time he went to a place, he would look at the map first. It had become a good habit for him. After all, if he did not even know the terrain and the various situations nearby, how could he talk about winning a battle? The strong would often think about how to use the terrain to win, and not passively wait for good luck to appear. Young Master, Tiger's Mane appeared and reported the various discussions he heard. This was one of Yang Qindong's requests. If he wanted to know more about the thoughts of the soldiers, he had to know what they usually said. Well, I know, Yang Qindong said. For him, this was not a problem at all. As long as he could finally subdue the uncontrollable white horse, it would be a fact, and all the discussions would disappear. By the way, all the supplies have been transported to the shore. The supplies Yang Qindong asked about were naturally war supplies, including clothing, food, shelter, transportation, and all kinds of weapons and ammunition. This time, if Yang Qindong wanted to enter the grassland to fight, it would be too far away from the sea. It would be unrealistic to think about replenishing supplies like usual. So this time, he brought as much as he could to prepare for a long battle. It's all been transported to the shore. Commander Wu Sheng has also finished the handover work with the commander of the 2nd Marine Regiment, Long Yun Tian. It's too dark now, so the Navy decided to rest here for the night and prepare to leave early tomorrow morning. Tiger's Mane reported truthfully. This was the new Gan capital, the northern part of the Great Ming Dynasty. The sudden appearance of so many warships would scare many people. In order to not provoke them, the Navy's departure was inevitable. Come quietly, leave quietly. This was the order that Yang Chundong had given before. Okay, tomorrow morning, you will represent me to send off Commander Long. Yang Chundong nodded, indicating that he knew about this matter. As a subordinate battalion commander, sending him off with the identity of Tiger's Mane was already giving him a lot of face. Yes, young master. Tiger's Mane replied. Seeing that there was nothing else, he left. Yang Chundong was left alone, looking at the sand table and sinking into deep thought. The next morning, Long Yin Tian's troops left with a dozen or so large warships. Tiger's Mane personally sent them off, causing the battalion commander to be a little excited. This matter was not a big deal for the 3rd Regiment of the Cold Vanguard, the Windchaser Cavalry Regiment, and the 6 auxiliary battalions led by Commander Lujua. They put more attention on the White Horse. Some of the soldiers who did not have the opportunity to witness this scene yesterday rushed over. Even the still injured cavalry regiment's 3rd Battalion commander, Ma Xiangshan, also rushed over. He also heard about yesterday's matter and was very curious about it. He naturally knew about the White Horse. He had tried to subdue it before, but unfortunately, he was unable to do so. And if Yang Chundong could do it, then presumably he would not need to use it in the following competition. With such great strength and the help of such a precious horse, it would be very difficult for him to be his opponent. After eating breakfast, there was already a sea of people outside the stable. Wherever there was space to stand, there would be people standing. They were all full of expectation as they waited for Yang Chundong to appear. When Yang Chundong appeared, there was a faint smile on the corner of his mouth. With so many people here, it was worth it for him to delay for a day to subdue the White Horse. He laughed heartily and fearlessly walked in front of the White Horse. When Yang Chundong appeared, the White Horse actually instinctively took 2 steps back. It was obvious that its intelligence was very high. It still clearly remembered that it was defeated by this man yesterday. No matter what the White Horse's performance was, Yang Chundong had already appeared. Then, he personally untied the reins, allowing the White Horse to regain its freedom. Then, he stretched out his large hand and pulled on the reins, as if he wanted to compete. The White Horse, who had suffered a loss yesterday, did not immediately submit. Perhaps it still wanted to fight, so it struggled with all its might, wanting to turn the situation around. However, when faced with Yang Chundong's infinite strength, it was useless. After struggling a few times, it realized that the man in front of it did not move at all. The White Horse could not help but snort. Then it stood up with its front hooves, as if it was about to step on a person. Haha, good timing. With a loud shout, Yang Chundong jumped up and accurately landed on the White Horse's back. As his body fell, a huge force pressed down, causing the White Horse's body to tremble. Then it desperately resisted and neighed. The White Horse knew that there were not many chances left for it to resist. If it could not flip this human off its back now, it was afraid that it could only choose to submit. As the king of horses, how could it be willing to be ridden by someone? It constantly twisted its body and even raised its front hooves, wanting to flip Yang Chundong off the horse. Unfortunately, no matter how hard it tried, Yang Chundong was like a rock, not moving at all. It was as if he was a part of the horse's back. Yang Chundong had already tried, and the increase in his physique that appeared yesterday was no longer there. In other words, if he wanted to rely on the White Horse to continue increasing his strength, he would not be able to do so. Since that was the case, there was no need to be courteous. He would just submit. Yang Chundong's attitude was resolute. Both of his hands tightly grasped the reins, and his legs would occasionally clamp down on the White Horse's body. Every time he exerted a huge force, the White Horse would feel a burst of soreness. It could endure it once or twice, but after a few times, it finally felt afraid. It also knew that this man was powerful. Being subdued by such a powerful man was not a shameful thing, and it would accept it. After acknowledging Yang Chundong's strength, the White Horse finally stopped resisting and became quiet. Suddenly, there was a tsunami of cheers. The 6th young master had used his strength to subdue the White Horse. Was this not worthy of their cheers? It was said that horses were not humans. They would fear your authority and status. They would only obey the strong. Chapter 635. Haha. Yang Qindong jumped down from the horse's back with a happy face. He finally conquered the white horse. Although the Qi did not appear, he was still very happy. Yang Air waved his hand in the distance and walked out of the crowd. He took out a saddle that had been prepared beforehand and put it on the white horse. The white horse was surrendering, but it was only surrendering to Yang Qindong. Naturally, it would not give face to the approach of strangers. Its front hooves were constantly thrown, and it looked like it would kick whoever dared to come over. Well, this is my brother. In the future, when I don't have time, he will take care of you. Feeling the white horse's restlessness, Yang Qindong turned around and touched the horse's head. The intention of intimacy was very obvious. As if it enjoyed Yang Qindong's touch, the white horse quickly calmed down and let Beta Persei put on the saddle that imprisoned its freedom. Sixth young master, since the white horse has surrendered, why don't you give it a name? Good horses have names. Windchaser saw Yang Qindong succeed and said with envy. He did not have any thoughts of jealousy. The sixth young master subdued the white horse with his own ability. This was something he could not do. Well, I should give a name. Why don't I call it White Dragon? Yang Qindong looked at the white horse's body and said after thinking for a while, White Dragon horse, good name. Suddenly, more than one person said flattering words. This may have the meaning of flattery, but the name was really good. But when someone mentioned the White Dragon horse, Yang Qindong's face could not help but be embarrassed. If it was the White Dragon horse, wouldn't he become Tangsung? Yang Qindong subdued the White Dragon horse, making his image suddenly become tall. Ma Xiangshan, who was watching from the crowd, also walked out and knelt in front of Yang Qindong. Sixth young master, I offended you before. I'm sorry. I admit that I'm not your opponent. Haha, get up. Yang Qindong was in a good mood. He laughed heartily and helped Ma Xiangshan up. He asked with concern, How is it? Are you feeling better now? Yesterday, the young master sent someone to deliver the medicine to you. Have you taken it? Thank you, sixth young master, for your concern. I've already taken some of the medicine and it's working very well. Ma Xiangshan said emotionally. This was not flattery. He was truly touched. He was the one who provoked the sixth young master. Not only did he not hold a grudge, he even sent someone to deliver medicine to express his concern. It just so happened that the other party's strength was so strong that even the white horse, even the white dragon horse, could be subdued. There should be no problem in dealing with him. If it was him who had strong strength, facing the provocation of the soldiers below, he would definitely teach them a lesson. He would never be so low-key and patient. Just based on this, he sincerely admired Yang Qindong. Well, get better soon. We still have to go to the battlefield to kill the enemy. Yang Qindong patted the other party's arm with concern. From this moment on, he had completely subdued the other party's heart. The white dragon horse had been subdued. The next step was to study the next battle plan. For this, Yang Qindong already had a plan in his heart. He announced the first military order after coming to the new Gan City Department. That was, everyone had to learn to ride from the soldiers of the cavalry regiment. The time limit was only 10 days. After 10 days, those who learned how to ride and kill the enemy on horseback would enter the battle order. On the other hand, there were so many supplies that needed to be looked after. Those who did not know how to ride would enter the logistics camp. Speaking of supplies, Yang Qindong took out a shiny long saber. This saber had a wide back and a thin blade. The body of the saber was relatively heavy, which was good for increasing the strength of slashing. The blade was smooth, and the handle was slightly curved towards the blade. This kind of curved handle was easier for the rider to control and not easy to drop. For example, the sabers used by the Mongolian cavalry were thinner and lighter than the military sabers. The Mongolians' riding skills were exquisite. They mainly relied on the powerful impact of the horse's speed to drive the saber to complete the slashing and other tactical movements. The saber in Yang Qindong's hand was an improved version of the saber. It had more advantages. At the same time, the body of the saber was made entirely of steel, making it stronger and sharper. If it was a person with great strength, it was possible to cut the opponent's saber in half with one slash. There were also soldiers in the cavalry regiment who carried sabers. However, their sabers were not very sharp. Most of them were spoils of war, and some of them were seriously worn out. Now that there was a new saber that was so sharp in front of them, who knew how many people were tempted? Everyone looked at the shiny saber with a longing expression and drooled. Seeing the longing in everyone's eyes, Yang Chendong laughed and said, "Don't be anxious. Everyone has one. This young master also hopes that you can use this sharp saber to kill the enemy and show the might of our army." Kill the enemy. Show the might. Immediately, some people began to shout loudly. Then, their voices became unified, and they shouted together in an imposing manner. If you want to attack first, you must first sharpen your weapon. Without enough logistical support, although guns could still be used, they could not be used endlessly like before. Thus, the saber became a necessity. Yang Chendong started to look forward to the scene of them riding on horseback and sweeping away thousands of enemies. The idea was beautiful, but when it came to training, the results on the first day were not as good as expected. The soldiers were used to fighting on land. When they suddenly rode on horseback, their legs could not exert force. Naturally, they were not used to it. Some of them even fell off their horses without doing anything. It was a laughable scene. Fortunately, the Cole vanguard was made up of able-bodied men. They had a good foundation and rich battle experience. Even when they fell off their horses, they instinctively took precautions. Therefore, there weren't many casualties. After falling off their horses, more and more soldiers began to get used to the necessary skill of a cavalry. Yang Chendong was the same as the soldiers. He also began to train his equestrian skills. Although he was strong, had a strong physique, good endurance, and was very flexible, it did not have much to do with whether he knew how to ride a horse or not. If one wanted to fight on horseback and kill in all directions, one must learn how to kill on horseback. Ma Xiangshan, who was very experienced in this aspect, became the instructor for Yang Chendong, his guards, and the recon company. This time, when they came to the north to expand their territory and influence, scouts were essential. Considering that the two provinces of Vietnam and Laos also needed scouts to explore the enemy situation as a response. This time, there was only one reconnaissance company that followed Yang Chen to the north. The company commander was the original battalion commander, Su Yunsheng. This was not because Su Yunsheng had made a mistake. He just wanted to achieve more military achievements. Without a doubt, now that the war in the north was about to start, there were more opportunities here. Therefore, he used his authority to follow Yang Chendong's troops as a company commander. Yang Chendong knew Su Yunsheng very well. He was also happy to have him by his side. This way, he could save a lot of time. Now, the recon company was able to benefit. They were able to follow Yang Chendong and his guards to train their equestrian skills. Compared to the other cold front, the brothers of the recon company had a foundation in equestrian skills. Usually, when they were scouting for information, they would often complete missions on horseback. Therefore, when they first started, they were still a little arrogant. If it was not for the sixth young master beside them, they probably would not even look at Ma Xiangshan. After all, scouts had their own pride. Ma Xiangshan did not take the scouts who had a foundation in equestrian skills seriously. In the first class, he even said bluntly, maybe some people already know how to ride a horse and feel that they have a certain level of equestrian skills. But as your temporary instructor, what I want to say is that your so-called equestrian skills are extremely laughable in my eyes. What you know should not be called equestrian skills. At most, it is just riding a horse. These arrogant words naturally attracted the dissatisfaction of scouts. There were even a few warriors who thought that their equestrian skills were good enough to provoke them. They looked as if they were saying, "Don't just say nice things, let's compete if you have the ability." As for the challenge, Ma Xiangshan gladly accepted it. He came up with a plan, which was to see who could run the distance of 2 miles first. This was the most basic requirement of equestrian skills. After all, if both sides were cavalry, whoever was faster would obviously have a bigger advantage. It was just a 2-mile run. For cavalry, it was not a test at all. They could run it in the blink of an eye. Everyone understood this principle and accepted the test. Then, Tiger's Mane personally acted as the referee. After the order was given, several scouts who challenged Ma Xiangshan spurred their horses and ran wildly. They had received training before such a competition and thought that they were not worse than anyone. However, when they really started to gallop, they realized that Ma Xiangshan had already ridden away, leaving everyone with a distant back. They thought that even if they lost to Ma Xiangshan in a 2-mile race, the difference would not be too big. After all, the distance was very close. However, when the real competition started, these scouts realized that their strength was so far behind. After the competition, everyone recognized Ma Xiangshan's strength. The instructor began to integrate into the role, constantly talking about his understanding of equestrian skills and the things that needed to be paid attention to. For example, he first talked about the lightness and consistency when riding a horse. Horses performed best when they were relaxed and unrestrained, so the contact between the rider's hand and the horse's mouth must be very light. The pressure on the reins should not be more than a few ounces. The force on the hindquarters, including extra muscle movements. Horses would be like all living things, trying to avoid work. If the reins were loose, it would easily avoid the rider's seat and leg support. If the rider succeeded in making the horse's hindquarters bear the weight, the horse's balance would be improved. The horse would raise its head and neck to reduce the pressure on the reins, and the rider could shorten the reins. If the rider grasped the correct bearing and riding scale, it would achieve the effect of man and horse as one. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.